Drones began to fly to the high tower on the flying island from all over the city. Inside the tower in the Monastery of Fire, human screams were heard. The dragon crushed the last survivor with its paw and pressed a hole in the floor through which his body fell. The body was impaled on the peak of the statue that was located on the floor below, and the drones captured his death, informing everyone that the Lord of Swords, Lucas, had fallen. The entire team was exterminated. Stage 127 failed. The remaining health of the boss of the Abode of Fire, the Dark Dragon of Death, is 94%. The decimated crew that had just recently announced their participation in the Trial by Fire challenge with smiles on their faces now lay dead among the rubble of the House of Fire. The viewers who saw their death live were surprised at their defeat, because they were the strongest team, but they were able to take down only 5% of the dragon's health. Viewers began to wonder if no one could defeat this monster. They shouldn't have gotten into this stage at all. Some of them asked them to help them at last, and some mourned them. How can such a boss be defeated? All people received a notification that they need to destroy the boss before the end of the period. 32 minutes and 20 seconds left. If it fails, the population of the area being examined will be destroyed. The area being examined is the solar system. People stood on the city streets and watched everything with the help of screens displayed on tall buildings. Someone asked, "Is the world really ending? Maybe they should attack the monster with the whole crowd." Someone replied that there weren't many adventurers left. One man had already come to terms with his speedy death and said that he would go and order a farewell dinner for himself with all the money. One person in the crowd said that he didn't want to die, but then a new notification came that a new member had arrived. The 128th participant named Ray Endo entered the Abode of Fire through the portal, and the audience was glad that some team had not yet given up. They hope that they will win. One of the spectators asked, "But weren't all the teams already dead?" But there was only one member in the team, and as soon as he took his first steps into the monastery, drones circled around him. After seeing one person, one of the spectators said that they had better say goodbye to their loved ones. He probably just decided to kill himself gracefully as a farewell. The dragon noticed him and narrowed his eyes slightly, asking if he came to him alone. He doesn't want to prolong his agony, so he shouldn't defend himself in vain. Then he grants him 3 whole minutes of life. After these words, he growled, and Ray raised his head to look at him completely. He laughed lightly, and with a smirk calling him a coward, thanked him for his advice. The longer he chats with him here, the longer he will live. Does he really value life very much? The smile on his face grew wider, and he said that he was so touched that he was in tears. The dragon was angered by his words and laughed, saying that he seemed to have decided to hasten his death. He opened his mouth wide and a cloud of fire began to gather inside, which quickly grew in size. The system reported that this is a dragon flame. The Dark Dragon of Death uses an area attack skill. Ray was not even afraid when he saw a bright flame in front of him and, hiding his hand behind his back, snapped his fingers and summoned a magic ball, and then asked, the first attack and immediately across the area. Did he understand correctly? Immediately after this, the dragon attacked and there was a loud explosion. Ray said it was dangerous to attack so suddenly. The dragon released the remnants of the flame from his mouth and was surprised that he was still alive. Ray showed a sparkling magic ball with a smile, and the dragon said that this could not happen. How did he parry his blow? The magic ball above his hand began to grow, and he replied that he did not come here empty-handed. Now he will receive a blow back. With a smile, he extended one hand forward and a green stream burst out of the magic ball, taking the form of a dragon. This stream swirled around the dragon of death and then sank its teeth into its belly. The system reported that the Dark Dragon of Death had 84% of its health remaining. Blood oozed from the dragon's wound, and Ray asked, "The main skill of the great and terrible dragon only deals 10% damage." He dispelled the magic ball over his hand and said in disappointment that he had been preparing in vain. The dragon caught his breath after a recent outbreak of pain and wanted to say something, but Ray interrupted him and, taking out a crystal wrapped in a chain from under his clothes, said that after this even the number of spectators might decrease. With a smile, he divided the crystal into several parts and a small skull appeared inside, and then told the dragon that he should not have opened his mouth. The system reported that he used a unique item, the shackles of the soul. The upper part of the crystal appeared above the dragon, and it began to be wrapped in chains on all sides, and he didn't even know what to do. After that, he was nailed to the ground with a roar, and the chains finally bound him, causing him to growl loudly. Ray raised one hand up, summoning some of the resulting smoke and sparks above his head, and told the dragon to sit quietly and watch. The dragon's body trembled, and he did not answer, and the drone that was flying nearby focused on Ray. He grabbed the sign with his hand and then stuck the base into the floor. On the sign were written details for transferring payment to his name to the bank. The drone flew closer and showed the audience everything that was written on the sign, and the other one circled around. There were 22 minutes and 52 seconds left before destruction, but Ray was in no particular hurry to kill the dragon and said that he would wait another 2 minutes. He grabbed the drone and said that if they want him to kill it, then they should transfer the money to his account. He leaned his elbow on the sign and, standing against the backdrop of the dragon, pointed the camera at himself and asked with a grin how much they think their lives are worth. He snapped his fingers and sat down in the chair he had summoned and began to wait. The audience asked, "Is he crazy? Let him call it a day and finish him off. The whole world is at stake. Money is not that important." Ray poured himself some tea and the dragon exclaimed, "Does he also demand payment in such a situation? Does he have any shame at all?" Ray yawned and snapped his fingers, tightening the chains on the dragon's body even tighter. He got angry about this and said that he would pay for his bullying. Violet flames began to gather inside its mouth, and a red warning appeared that the dark dragon of death had activated its ultimate skill, Flame of Great Rage. The dark dragon opened its mouth wider and released a bright stream of flame at Ray, but he didn't even pay attention to it and took a sip of tea, and the barrier behind him protected him. The dragon's eyes opened wider in surprise, and Ray, putting a cup of tea on a saucer, said that he was not learning anything. He looked at the place unprotected by the barrier. It was burned to the ground, and he asked, had he not told him to sit quietly? Otherwise the sign with his account number will not be visible. The dragon said in shock that he couldn't believe it. Even the ultimate skill didn't work. Ray scrolled through the history of incoming transfers on his phone and said that this was actually his remark. Only 10 billion were transferred to him. Are they laughing at him or what? He doesn't even know if he can do the job properly for that kind of money. He leaned back and, looking into the drone's camera, lazily waved his hand and said goodbye. After that, the live broadcast was interrupted and all people froze in shock in front of a huge screen on which the inscription "Error" was displayed. After a minute of silence, the crowd roared indignantly. Some man asked, that is, he needs to transfer all his savings. What kind of farewell was this? Why did he interrupt the broadcast? The woman took the child in her arms and fell to her knees, asking, "Is this the savior of the world?" Horrible. Everyone on the streets began to beg for his help, and people from high circles became nervous. While following the boss down the corridor, the man told him that if they paid the full amount, they would suffer big losses in the future. He shouted in response that he was an unfortunate idiot. They would think about that later. They can also become his sponsors. Let him transfer everything they have to him. After that, an amount of 10 trillion yen was credited to Ray's account, and he, starting to rise from his chair, said that he had finally received as much as he wanted. He is now the richest man in the world. He entered the system space and activated his side skill, the Blacksmith of Souls, and said with a grin that now it was time to save the world. He snapped his fingers and took a vial containing the soul of a type A mage, the soul of a type B dragon, and the soul of a god of the same type. The system reported that the formation of special equipment had begun. The holy sword of the great artisan appeared in front of Ray, and then he left the system space and approached the dragon, which had already begun to break free from the chains. The dragon laughed and asked, "Is he crazy? He was going to defeat him with this toothpick." He grabbed the chains and then suddenly stood up and broke them, screaming that he was finished. He will kill him with his own hands. Before he could finish speaking, Ray cut off one of his paws and it fell to the floor with a crash. After that, the dragon growled in pain, and Ray jumped up and, approaching him, swung his sword several times, first cutting off the dragon's head and cutting his neck into several pieces, and only then proceeded to the body. Soon he landed on the ground, and behind him the dragon's body began to fall in pieces. He raised the sword up and swung it, shaking off the blood, and said that his death was already a foregone conclusion. He wiped the blood from his face with a grin and said that this happened at the moment when a substantial amount came into his account. But how did Ray Endo get to this point? Some time ago. It was a sunny day, the wind was rushing into the small room, and Ray was playing a game using a virtual reality device and was sweating profusely from the heat and effort. A bright notification from the system popped up in front of him, congratulating him on successfully passing the last test. Ray fell to one knee from fatigue and asked with a smile of disbelief, did he really pull it off? A scam game was the common name given to one fully immersive game, Prophecy Online. This game has excellent VR world development, fully immersive action, and 16K resolution. Using a VR device, the player could sense sounds, smells, and objects. It is an online RPG with an open world. Its description stated that those who complete the game to the end will gain unlimited access to resources that does not flow even after centuries. But no one believed the description of the game. Ray was one of those who simply played and had fun. They say it would be better if the reward was transferred to his account. But one day everything changed. He remembered how one fine day he was working at a construction site and the foreman announced a break. The workers went for a snack with smiles, and Ray sat on a bench under the canopy and, hiding from the heat and listening to the conversations of other workers, said that then they would clear away construction waste until nightfall. He worked hard at a construction site as usual, but he couldn't get a normal job, so he started working as a laborer on construction sites. He was squeezed as if in a vice. He worked until exhaustion in the hot sun, and from his colleagues he received only mockery and ridicule. When he opened his food container and started to snack, he received a message from the game Prophecy Online on his phone. He looked at the notification and wondered, is this a letter from the developer? But he seemed to turn off all notifications. In the letter, Ray named the top first player and congratulated him for being able to reach first place in the power ranking among all beta players. The reward will be sent to his account, so they ask him to confirm the transfer. They wholeheartedly wish him success in Prophecy Online. Ray unscrewed the cap of the water bottle and thought with a grin, what is this? Have they become email scammers now? He'll check it right now. He logged into his account and, starting to drink water, said that his account was still empty. But suddenly he fell silent, and when he saw his balance, he was very surprised. Seeing the amount of 1,335 yen, he loudly exclaimed, "What is this?" While he was looking at the phone screen in shock, one of the workers called out to him and said that he wanted to ask him something. Not hearing an answer, he walked up to him and touched him on the shoulder, asking what was wrong with him. He overheated, or what? Ray quickly jumped up from his seat and, pushing the worker, ran from the construction site, and he fell and asked where he was going. He called him several times, but Ray did not pay attention. He ran home with a smile and thought, can he really make money in this game? If those words about unlimited access to resources that will not expire after centuries are true, then, in general, he devoted all his energy to this game. But he realized too late that he was too naive. This game is merciless to the players. They were like pawns on a chessboard for it. Level bosses destroyed not only players, but also their saves. Dungeon exits always appeared in different places. But the most important thing is that they felt every blow in the game in reality. When players encountered too realistic pain, they developed a fear of death and stopped playing. From his job, he earned just enough to cover only the most basic needs. To continue playing, he went into debt and loans, and soon moneylenders began knocking on his doors. But he had no choice but to move forward in the hope of unlimited access to resources that would not expire even after centuries. Now, when he had just completed the game, he again received a message from the developer in which he congratulated him on completing the game. The experience he gained will undoubtedly remain a valuable resource in the future. Ray caught his breath and took off the VR device and, placing it on the floor with trembling hands, said with a smile that he really did it. After that, a notification sound sounded, and he immediately rushed to the phone. He received an email from the developer of Prophecy Online. He excitedly clicked on the notification and saw what was in the email. This message is addressed to all Prophecy Online players. Not long ago they achieved their goal. Someone appeared who was able to complete the game to the end. Therefore, all game servers will be disabled from now on. Ray asked, "What about the reward?" In the last line of the letter, the developer thanked all players for their support and participation. Without seeing even a hint about the reward, Ray let go of the phone in shock and its screen broke. He lowered his head dejectedly and asked, "What about his reward?" He beat the game after all. They should reward him, right? There's simply so much money there that they can't transfer it at once. He convinced himself of this and went to the mattress, and then lay down and said hopefully that he would check the account tomorrow. But since he received the first $1,000,000, no more money has come. He kept thinking, how much better would his life be if he left everything halfway? But no matter how much he regrets, time cannot be returned. A week has passed since then. Ray woke up on a hot morning and heard notification sounds through the whirring of the fan. He asked what was going on there early in the morning. He took the phone and made sure that no one seemed to have called him. He looked in the direction where the sound came from and saw a screen in front of him that said that the main quest and the ice test stage had failed. Moscow is destroyed. The main quest of testing the Earth begins. Remaining time 43 days, 7 hours, and 58 minutes. Let them destroy the boss before the end of the period. Please note, if you fail, the area being tested will be destroyed. After looking at several screens that popped up at once, he asked in confusion, "What is this?" Meanwhile, on TV, the news showed news that Moscow had been wiped off the face of the Earth, and a satellite image was also attached, which showed that the city center was completely burned out. Will Japan be next? A reporter named Hayes, who was at the scene, asked if they saw it. Moscow no longer exists. The entire city has been reduced to dust. The Russian government said there was no chance of survival left. Moreover, unknown creatures suddenly appeared on the territory. The cities seemed to be under attack by something resembling dragons. A helicopter with a team from the Japanese media flew over the destroyed Moscow. Hayes said that the horror that happened to Moscow now awaits Japan. According to their viewers, this disaster is similar to a quest in a certain game called Prophecy Online. The similarity is almost 100%. Ray was surprised when he heard the words about the game. A geologist invited to the news channel did not believe the report and said that the video was falsified. All destruction was caused by a natural disaster that occurred due to the shift of tectonic plates. Hayes's colleague objected that their reporter was broadcasting from the scene, but the geologist did not let him finish and said that he did not know what kind of monsters there were. This is most likely interference from the camera. The monster that was under the helicopter in the meantime began to collect energy in its mouth, and Hayes nervously asked, "They are safe, right? That thing over there has been looking in their direction for too long. You won't aim it at them, will you?" Seeing this, her colleague told them to urgently fly out of there. Can they hear him? Let them get out of there now. After that, the live broadcast was interrupted, and he, looking at the screen in shock, called out to her and asked her to answer. After watching the news, Ray said that these were not slabs. He was sure of it. There is no doubt it happened. After that, he began to get dressed and get ready to go out. Although the world found itself in a terrible situation, when the game became a reality, he was absolutely calm, because then only one thought was spinning in his head. The rest of the people received the same notifications and hesitantly began to master the system, pressing different buttons. When Ray wanted to leave his house, he looked at the task window in front of him. There are 43 days, 7 hours and 54 minutes left until the end of the Earth test. Test location, Japan, progress 0%. Ray was calm because of the thought that the experience he received would undoubtedly become a valuable resource in the future. These resources in question implied strategies for completing the game. He was the only one who went through it to the end, and the salvation of the world was in his hands. He turned the doorknob and then swung the door open and walked confidently out into the street. He thought that with this unproduced power, he would certainly make a lot of money. He ran through the streets of the city with the thought that since Prophecy Online had become a reality, a race for points would now begin among former players. He needs to run to the nearest dungeon. With the onset of the apocalypse, the atmosphere on the streets became gloomy. As he ran past people, he could hear them wondering, is Japan really over? They need to run quickly, but where? No transport works anymore. Ray was already starting to get tired and gritted his teeth, but suddenly the familiar voice of a lone shark named Takuo called out to him, calling him a brat and ordering him to stop. Ray stopped, seeing a familiar face in front of him, and the moneylender, lighting a cigarette, asked displeasedly, does that mean he ignores them, but goes for a walk? Ray caught his breath after running and thought it was Takuo from the loan sharks. Takuo threw a cigarette butt in his direction and said that he was just on his way to visit him. Let him turn around and go home. The cigarette butt hit Ray right in the face and left a mark on his cheek, but he didn't respond. A year ago, while he was in the game, he received a letter saying that their company was offering players an interest-free 200,000 yen, but only for those who qualified. Let them enjoy the game, don't concentrate on work. Conditions: players who receive unlimited resources undertake to give half of them to them. Then Ray was happy and thought, as much as 200,000 without interest. He can give it back later, when he finishes the game. Seeing such supposedly good conditions, he agreed. But, of course, in reality everything turned out quite differently. They actually gave him 200,000 yen, but then, after he had already spent it, they sent him a contract with exorbitant interest rates. According to them, he did not pass the selection, so they demanded 50% after 10 days. He met with loan sharks, but they threatened him with a gun, so he had to take out several loans to pay on time. However, when he was ready to pay everything on time, they did not answer the calls. They waited for interest to rise. While Ray was remembering this, Takuo asked with a grin, "It's time for him to give them their money, right?" Ray clenched his teeth and said displeasedly that they didn't give him a chance to return them on time. He asked, "Is he serious?" All debtors usually say such excuses. "He's just a pathetic brat." He came closer and said that actually that's not what he was here for. He played Prophecy Online, right? Ray became wary, and the moneylender said that the state of the world now is just like in a game. He walked up to him and abruptly grabbed him by the clothes, shouting, "He knows something, right? Let him lay out everything he knows." Ray's face darkened, and after a short pause, he told him to take his hands off him. The veins on Takuo's face bulged with anger, and he asked, did he forget who he was talking to? Ray said that he would give him one very important piece of advice. After that, he activated the beginner's fist skill, and when the moneylender saw his hand shining blue, he let go of him in fear. The system reported that his impact force had increased by 50%. After that, he quickly punched the moneylender several times, causing blood to spray from his mouth, and he fell, hitting a road sign. Ray approached him and deactivated the skill, saying that in this world he would be in charge. Takuo remained silent, and Ray said that he didn't seem to hear him anymore. He ran on, leaving the moneylender to continue to sit unconscious, and the people who drove past in their cars became interested in the spectacle. A guy in a hood named Light rolled down the window, and a girl named Rumi Sito, who was sitting next to him, asked, "This is a game skill, right?" Light did not answer and grinned with a thought that he did not think that he would meet an initiate so soon. Soon all laws will turn into nothing. The whole basis of the world will be rewritten. He laughed quietly and thought that the situation was getting more and more curious. Soon Ray arrived at the entrance to the goat's sanctuary and approached the huge doors. He has no doubt this place is exactly the same as in the game. Coming closer, he stopped and noticed something to the side. There was a car parked on the road nearby, and he thought, "Is there already someone inside?" He went inside the sanctuary, and a long road down appeared in front of him, along which he descended for several minutes. Approaching the entrance to the first hall, he suspected something was wrong. Smelling blood, he immediately covered his nose. Going inside the hall, he saw a pile of corpses of lizard-like humanoids on the floor. In the very center of the hall stood the team and their leader, Light. He noticed Ray and told the others to look. Another one had arrived. He placed both hands on the hilt of the sword that he plunged into the monster's head and asked if he got here. "Does that mean he is also a player?" Ray asked displeasedly. "Were they the boss here?" Light confirmed his words and said that these high-level monsters are called shining lizards. If it weren't for them, he would already be dead. Ray thought, "Are these high-level lizards? They are the lowest in rank." Light took off his hood and said with a smile that as he sees it, he came alone. This means he has no friends. How about becoming his subordinate? He will simply give him half of his rewards, and in return he, the strongest, will protect him, the weakest. The faces of his team members standing behind him showed different emotions. Ray closed his eyes and apologized, saying that he preferred playing solo. He pointed his finger at them with a smile and said that besides, they don't have a single chance against the boss. Light's face darkened with irritation, and the others were surprised by his words. They went behind the column and began to quietly discuss what they should do with him. Light suggested that they finish him off after they deal with the boss, and Rumi asked if he was serious. "This is too much." Light replied that all the remaining players were only obstacles in their path. The fewer people know about the game, the better off they are. He pointed his thumb down and said that it was his decision, and anyone who disagreed would die by accident. The team members became nervous and remained silent, not daring to object to him, and then he said that the boss of the level, the fire goat, was a rather difficult opponent. But after victory he recovers after 7 whole days. He doesn't want that guy to get loot from the boss too, so that until he is victorious they cannot let him pass in. The system reported that there were 5 minutes left before the doors opened. Very soon the doors will open, and they will enter the room with the boss. Ray, who was standing away from everyone, was approached by several team members, among whom was the magician Rumi and a swordsman named Yuji. Ray looked at them with a grin and asked, "What is it?" Did they decide to fight him? Yuji clenched his hands into fists and together with Rumi said that it is so. Let him not move. Ray remained silent and thought that he could teach them a lesson for a second, but he didn't even want to get his hands dirty. Finally, time began to come to an end, and they went up the stairs to the door, looking back at Ray. He remained in the hall and looked after them with a smile, thinking that he would still have time to kill the boss when they lost. Time ran out and the doors opened. The team went inside. Ray stayed outside and leaned against the wall, starting to sip his tea. He grinned and wondered how far they could go. Rumi, meanwhile, asked worriedly, did he not follow them? Light smiled and said that this only made them feel better. She asked, but what if they realized that they made his death look like an accident? He told her not to worry about it. She was thinking too much. During this conversation, they almost reached the end of the spacious corridor and Light, hitting the guy's shield with his fist, told him to be on guard. The guy showed him a thumbs up with a smile and said that as long as he has a shield with an epic level engraving, no boss is afraid of them. He can count on him. Suddenly, a strong current of wind blew through the corridor and Light exclaimed, "What the hell? Where does this wind come from?" At the end of the corridor, a huge column of flame flared up, from which wind and heat emanated. Light froze in place and looked at the flames in horror, thinking that this was the appearance of the boss. The flames finally dissipated, and the clatter of the monster's 4 hooves was heard. A huge centaur with a hammer in his hands appeared in front of them, and they all realized that the boss, the hellish goat, had appeared. The goat bleated loudly, and flames burst out of his mouth. After that, he sharply swung his hammer in a circle, and all team members were thrown in different directions. There was a loud scream, and a powerful wind rose, causing them to fly even further away. Some were thrown straight to the doors, and Light was among them. They were covered with the shadow of a hellish goat, and he, looking up at it, thought that this was very bad. What should they do now? The girl who fell next to him got up and asked him what should they do now. He waved his hand and ordered everyone to be silent. They were retreating immediately. The man who had already tried to open the door said that the door would not open. From the side came the voice of a guy with a shield, asking what the hell they were doing. Light looked towards the team members who were running towards them from the other end of the corridor and told them to hold his point. He called out to the guy with the shield and asked, "His shield can withstand anything, right?" The guy got nervous and wanted to object, but Light interrupted him and said that since he said so, then let him act. The rest of the team ran to the door, and he stood up to protect himself, while the hell goat raised his hammer over his head and slowly approached him, trampling the corpses of his comrades. The monster began to attack, and the guy looked at him with horror in his eyes, but did not dare to move. After that, the hellish goat hit him with a hammer, causing fragments of the floor to fly in all directions and dust to rise. Hearing the crash, Rumi and Yuji turned around and their faces froze in horror when they saw the crushed body of their comrade in the depression from the impact. The hellish goat snatched the shield from the hands of the corpse, raised it above his head and opened his mouth wide, after which he let go of it and chewed it with his teeth with a crunching sound. The team members were amazed by this sight, and one of them asked, "Did he chew through the epic shield?" Light said in shock that he was a monster. He thought that this should not have happened. They were preparing to meet the fiery goat. Even beginners could defeat this monster if they knew the strategy. But after the new version, a boss appeared that no one could defeat one hell of a goat. All 1,462 players failed to kill the boss. Light gritted his teeth and trembled in fear, thinking that he shouldn't be here. Why wasn't it removed? Suddenly, he remembered Ray, who was standing outside, and thought that although the doors couldn't be opened from the inside, he could still get in from the outside. He ran to the door and started banging on it with his fists, calling out to the black-haired guy and asking him to open the door. They will give him all the rewards for defeating the monster. He stopped knocking and listened, but no one answered. He screamed again and asks, "He can hear him, right? Let him open the door now." But while he was screaming, a hammer flashed behind him and hit him. The monster was already at the door and scattered all the people to the sides with a hammer. They fell to the floor and wheezed in pain after the impact. Light tried to get up and, looking up at the monster, said that he was too strong. "They're all going to die at this rate." At that moment, Ray opened the doors and went inside, saying that it was so rude for a leader to beg for help from others. Doesn't he think so? He looked at Light writhing in pain with a smug smile, and he clenched his teeth and thought that he was an idiot. He doesn't care anymore. He'll use him as bait and escape. He rose to his feet and told everyone else to head out. He would distract the monster. All the surviving team members ran to the door, and when Rumi ran past Ray, he advised her not to do this and tripped her, after which she fell. She sobbed in pain, and Ray slowly walked towards the monster and, noticing something to the side, stopped. Light ran with all his might to the door, but it had already begun to close, and he, stretching his hand forward, thought, "What about him?" He was almost on the other side of the door, but it closed right in his face and squeezed his hand. Feeling pain, he screamed loudly and leaned his foot on the door, trying to pull his hand out, but he couldn't do it and he started screaming again. The hellish goat came up to him and said that he was so noisy. Light immediately fell silent, and the monster swung his hammer and said irritably that his screams were making his ears fade, so let him finally shut up. Light, with fear in his eyes, turned to the monster and cold sweat appeared on his face, after which the sound of an impact was heard and his body was crushed, and blood splashes scattered to the sides. Rumi and Yuji, who were sitting nearby on the floor, looked at this in horror and asked what they should do now. Ray picked up Light's sword from the floor and asked, "Don't they know? Everything is very simple." He extended his hand with the sword upward and, examining the blade, said that although he was still an idiot, his sword was not bad. The hellish goat raised a hammer over him and laughingly asked, "Did he also want death? So be it, he will help him." After that, he struck with a hammer at the place where Ray should be, but at that time he was already above the monster's head. He grinned and said that he was really talking nonsense. After that, he cut off the goat's horns, and then, moving down his body, he began to deliver cutting blows. The monster screamed loudly and its horns loudly fell to the ground, and at that time Ray found himself next to the surviving team members. He called out to them, causing Rumi to jump back in fear with tears in her eyes, and Yuji to become wary. Ray threw the sword over his shoulder and looked at them with a smile, saying that he would save them for 10 million yen. How do they like this offer? Rumi couldn't believe her ears, looked at him in shock, and then asked again, 10 million yen. Ray confirmed her words and said that from each 10 million for saving lives. Yuji annoyedly told him not to talk nonsense. Where do they get so much money? Rumi agreed with his words and exclaimed that this was too much. Ray pointed a sword at them and said that if they don't have money, then let them earn it with their own labor. They don't want to die so early, do they? They will give him 90% of the reward from every boss they defeat. He thought about asking for full payment, but so be it. They can take 10% of the reward for themselves. He's not some kind of despot. Rumi indignantly told him not to fool around, and Yuji exclaimed that even with Light they gave him 50% of the spoils. Ray asked, "So they refuse?" Immediately after his words, they were covered by the shadow of a monster, and a stream of flame flashed over their heads. The hellish goat, gathering flames in his mouth, called Ray a mortal and said that he dared to deprive him of his pride, his horns. He will pay for it now. After that, he released a huge fireball in their direction, and they did not even have time to leave the line of fire. Rumi quickly took out her staff and defended herself with a barrier, but it was difficult for her, and Ray jumped, thereby dodging. Rumi, along with Yuji, fell to the side screaming. Thanks to her shield, they were able to survive. With a trembling hand, she grabbed the shoulder on which she had fallen, after which Ray landed next to them and said that they survived. It was close. He wonders how long their luck will last. Rumi nervously said that she would agree to anything, even if he just kills him. Yuji got excited and said that he also agrees. Hearing their answer, Ray grinned and said that they agreed. He turned to the monster, around whom the fire was still blazing, and said that he had not beaten him for a long time. Hearing this, the hellish goat looked down at him and asked, "How long has it been?" He doesn't remember ever losing to a mortal. Yuji was surprised and asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Rumi said that with the new Hellgoat update, no players have managed to defeat it. Ray looked at the monster with a confident look and thought that there was no update related to this boss in this game. After his victory over the Hellgoat, he changed his form and players could only fight against the Fire Goat. While he was thinking about this, the Hellgoat attacked him, but Ray immediately reacted and deflected the blow, causing the hammer to miss. The hellish goat did not expect this and asked in surprise how he was able to fend off his hammer. Who is he anyway? Ray ran to him and said that with such an attack, even a level 50 veteran player would meet his death. For him such a blow would be fatal, but as long as he knew his weakness, it would not kill him. The hellish goat gritted his teeth in rage and swung his hammer, and Ray ran past, after which he began to dodge all the goat's blows, moving to the side at the last moment. The monster exclaimed, "Why can't he even hit it?" Thus, Ray approached his head and, cutting his eye, said that he was not cheating on himself. He was moving exactly the same as in their last battle. Moving around the monster, he continued to strike its body while Rumi and Ray watched. Yuji asked, "Is he winning?" He clenched his hand into a fist and with a smile shouted at Ray to continue. "Let him kill this goat's face." Ray didn't like his support and irritably told him to shut up, and he responded by exclaiming that he was so rude. Ray landed and his opponent's hammer came close and hit the floor, destroying it. After that, he hit the hammer again and said that he was just very dexterous, that's all. Ray managed to survive, but as he was dodging, he hit the wall and was pinned in the corner, after which he said that he was pinned against the wall. The goat approached him and, with a menacing look, putting the hammer on the floor, asked if he had anything to say in the end. Ray told him to go to hell and said that he wouldn't hit him even at that distance. After his words, the hellish goat flared with rage and said that he understood him. He raised his head up and opened his mouth wide, accumulating hot flames inside. The fire started to spread around and Rumi said that it was so hot in here and Yuji asked what he was doing. Ray thought it was a flame destroying everything in its path. Even level 99 players could not survive such an attack. There is nowhere to hide from this attack, no matter how hard they hide. And this is his most important trump card. Ray's eyes lit up in anticipation, and he said that this was wonderful. This is what he was waiting for. He crouched down and the system reported that the beginner's kick skill was activated. The power of the kick attack increased by 50%. He pushed off the ground and rushed upward with such force that the floor broke under his feet. Pushing off from the wall and the monster's hammer, he got to the ceiling and thought that the flame destroying everything in its path was a powerful spell. But at the moment of casting it, the boss was absolutely defenseless. He is so focused on the spell that he is not even able to move. He turned over head down and then touched his feet to the ceiling and, pushing off from it, rushed towards the monster and pointed the tip of his sword down, with the thought that even a first-level player like him could slam it with one precise blow to the head. As expected, Ray stabbed his sword into the head of the hell goat, causing him to immediately fall and break the floor with his weight. The monster no longer moved, and small flames burst out of its mouth. Ray said that if he had already begun to cast Flame that destroys everything in its path, then he would not be able to interrupt the spell. In this state, his flames will simply eat away all his insides. As soon as he said this, the body of the hellish goat became charred and flames began to escape from all the holes. Ray pushed off the hilt of the sword and jumped, asking if he could survive his own flames. Finding himself high above the monster, he saw how his body turned even blacker and the flames intensified. He smiled slightly and said goodbye to the goat, and after that he landed on the floor, and the hellish goat behind him instantly burst into flames and screamed heart-rendingly. After the flames died down and the burnt body fell, they approached the corpse and the system reported that the unique boss hellgoat had been defeated. Yuji breathed a sigh of relief and said that thank God they were saved, and Rumi covered her mouth in shock and said that she couldn't believe it. She looked at the imperturbable Ray and said that he defeated the boss without receiving a single injury. After that, a message popped up in front of Ray saying that he was the first in the whole world who managed to kill a unique boss. For this, he is awarded a unique title, Novice Conqueror. Ray became interested and said that there were no such titles in the game. Still, the world and the game are different in some ways. The title description says that the unique title increases his attack power by 50% when attacking bosses. Ray was surprised and repeated, 50%? Sounds too cool. The system reported that since he was the first in the whole world to be granted a unique title, as a bonus for such an achievement, he could choose a subclass for himself. Ray was again surprised and asked, was this a choice at the very beginning? That's too generous. The system asked, does he want to choose a subclass right now? Ray asked, what kind of question is this? He pressed the yes button and said that the answer was obvious. After that, he found himself in another space, and the system informed him that after the selected subclass, it would be impossible to change this. Ray touched the panel in front of him and sparks began to emanate from it, and in his thoughts he said that he needed a soulsmith. After that, waves began to emanate from his hand across the panel, and then a bright flash appeared and sparks swirled around him, and that's how he received his subclass. The system congratulated him. Now the soulsmith subclass is available to him. Ray grinned and said that he was hunting for money and hit the jackpot. Now he decided to see what the monster dropped to him, and a key and a dagger appeared in the air above him. Rumi asked, "Are you the key to underground waters? These are special hunting grounds where you can not only improve your skills, but also make good money." Yuji frowned and said that according to Light, this is a very rare friend for whom he assembled the group. Ray spun the key on his finger and after a short pause replied that this thing was not that rare. The drop of this key is 100%. Rumi said in confusion that he spoke so self-confidently, and Yuji got angry and exclaimed, "How does he even know this?" Ray did not answer, and, showing them the dagger, said that this hellish dagger was really a rare thing. He aimed at the nearest debris, and then lightly touched it, and, swinging down, seemed to cut the stone. Rumi asked in shock what he just did. Did he cut the stone like butter? Ray calmly replied that this was still too weak a result. He opened the system window and thought that this was where he would test his new class. He hopes he has enough materials to improve. A subclass, as the name suggests, is an additional class to an existing one. Most of these subclasses are useless, with the exception of a couple of rare subclasses. The Blacksmith of Souls is one of them. People with this subclass are able to extract a fragment of the soul from all things: people, animals, plants, and ore. Different fragments give different improvements. With the help of this subclass, it is possible to beat this stupid game. He activated the Eye of the Soul, and when his eye glowed blue, he looked closely at the blade and the system reported that the item could be awakened using the Soulsmith subclass. Required items: F rank Mage Soul Fragment. He turned his gaze to Rumi, who was discussing something with Yuji at the time, and thought that this girl seemed to have a magic class. With the help of the Eye of the Soul, he learned her name and that she had the 5th level. To remove the soul, she needs to sign a contract. He thought, contract? He wanted to ask them for 90% of every boss they defeated, but that sounds much more attractive. He stabbed the blade into the floor, and then walked up to them and, showing the key, asked, "Do they want to become stronger? He can give them this key for this." Yuji replied that they really wanted to, and Rumi became wary and asked if this was a joke. He showed them the contract and said that they must promise to bring him all the items on this list, and he would consider this as an advance. Yuji took the key and with tears in his eyes said that they were lucky. With the help of it, they could get rich. Rumi was also touched by his kindness and thanked him with a smile. Ray replied that they should not thank him. The richer they become, the richer he will become. The system reported that he had entered into a contract with Rumi. All conditions for extracting the soul fragment had been fulfilled. A flask appeared above his hand and began to draw out a fragment of the soul, and at the end the lid took the shape of a huge hat. The system reported that a fragment of the soul of an F-rank magician had been received. Ray exclaimed that the materials have been received. Now he begins forging. He activated the soulsmith skill, and the fragment of the magician's soul and the dagger began to swirl in a whirlpool, beginning to merge. Ray raised his hands and, looking at the blade above him, told it to wake up. There was a bright flash, after which an updated hellish dagger with a glowing edge emerged from it. The dagger fell into his hands and the system reported that the awakening was successful. The attack power of the weapon was increased, and a new skill was available, a soul slash. He wanted to test his new skill and swung his dagger, while Yuji and Rumi automatically stepped aside. After that, Ray swung his dagger, releasing a powerful shock stream that reached the end of the corridor and went beyond the sanctuary, breaking through the wall. From such a loud sound, all the birds in the area flew away, and sunlight penetrated inside the sanctuary and illuminated the surprised faces of Yuji and Rumi. Ray looked up at the sky through the hole he had made, and several small pieces of debris fell from the ceiling. Rumi hiccuped in fear, and Yuji asked in shock, "Is it possible for a person to have such power?" Having thus checked the force of the blow, Ray said that it was not bad. He has weapons and skills too. There's only one thing left. After these words, he turned to Rumi, and she was very scared. She closed her eyes and covered her head with her hands, in her thoughts asking him not to kill her, but he simply passed by. He approached the wreckage, and Rumi was surprised by this. Then she turned around and saw that he had sat down next to the corpse and folded his hands in prayer. Her eyes sparkled with admiration, and she wondered if he really wanted to honor the memory of the deceased players. But everything was completely different. After prayer, Ray cleaned out the pockets of the corpse and, having found a wallet, began to count the money and said that this money was now his. He thinks he will definitely have enough for a taxi. Yuji said that he is worse than the Hell Goat himself, like a monster in human form. Rumi, who was also surprised by the spectacle, agreed with him. Time passed. Ray went to his next destination and reached the entrance to an abandoned temple. Having gone inside, he looked around, and then walked forward along the road until he came across a well. He climbed inside and, starting to go down the stairs, thought that at the bottom of the well there was a secret dungeon where he could easily farm himself experience. The monsters there are quite strong. To complete this dungeon you will need a group of at least 3 people. But now that he has awakened the dagger, all the experience and money will become his. A few minutes later he went down to the very bottom, and, as soon as he put his foot on the ground, a gold coin flew towards him, and he noticed it. He immediately swung his dagger and cut the coin, after which he took a fighting stance, and the 2 halves of the coin fell behind him. Seeing those who threw the coin, he became wary. A group of 3 people approached him, and the most important of them, named Kuki, said with a smile that there were new faces here. His gaze became menacing, and he said that he had entered their territory. Ray pointed a dagger in the direction and asked, "Why on earth is this their territory?" Kuki asked. "He knows the rules, right?" "The early bird gets the worm, right?" Ray said that if they have a group of 3 people, he can show them some great areas to gain experience, for a fee, of course. A guy named Ian replied that they were happy here too. His friend Adrian said that he needed to pay them, and they would let him through without any problems. Hearing this, everything became clear to Ray. New entrepreneurs of this world. He asked how much he owed for the passage. Kuki showed the number 5 on his fingers and said 50,000 yen per hour. There are a lot of monsters ahead, and if he defeats them, he will get his money back. Ray handed him the bills and agreed, saying that he would quickly make up for what he spent. Kuki replied that he had this place at his disposal for exactly 1 hour. They let him pass further without any problems, and he ended up in a cave with crystals. It was a wolf's lair. Hearing a loud roar, he immediately stopped and turned in the direction of the sound. The steps of animals were heard. A pack of wolves surrounded Ray from all sides, and they began to howl loudly. Looking at the grinning wolf, he thought that it was a diamond wolf, an average-level monster, but with a low health indicator. He looked around the cave and wondered if a whole flock had come running towards him, right? Of course, he can use a soul slash, but he would rather save his strength. Suddenly, all the wolves roared, which meant the start of the attack. They all jumped at once from the stones towards him, but as soon as they approached, he cut off their heads, limbs, and everything that came to his hand. Having killed the wolves attacking him, he moved on to the next ones. When there was no one alive in the area, he sat down on a stone and decided to rest. He took out some tea bags and said with a smile that now he could refresh himself, otherwise his throat was dry. He stuck the straw into the bag and began to drink, but at the same moment Adrian appeared behind him. He swung, and when he wanted to strike, Ray threw the tea to the side and grabbed the dagger, blocking his blow. After that, he grabbed the weapon more comfortably and then swung it, and his opponent leaned back, trying to dodge. Ray's blow reached the ceiling and a roar was heard, and they increased the distance between themselves. Several small pieces of debris fell from the ceiling, and a freshly inflicted cut on Adrian's forehead bled, after which he said with a wide smile that he almost cut him. Ray remained silent and thought that he had managed to dodge. This means that this is not the first time he has fought against people. He asked, did he decide to attack him from behind while he was distracted by the monsters? Isn't that too low? Adrian flexed his fists and replied that it was much more interesting this way. Ray asked, he's just holed up in this area waiting for strong players with decent loot to take out while they try to deal with the monsters, right? The voice of the leader of the trio was heard from above, saying that he was so quick-witted. He, together with Ian, walked out to the edge of the cliff with a smile and showed himself to Ray. He looked up at him and said that this was not a wolf's den, but a gathering of hyenas, and he wonders why only he thought of coming here. But he'd better recruit a stronger group. They're unlikely to stand up to him. The smile on Cookie's face disappeared, and he couldn't find anything to answer, and Ray, looking closely at Adrian, thought that when he first met them, he didn't notice it right away. This huge guy here is the owner of a heavy hand weapon. He turned his gaze to Ian and thought that this little thing with the sword adds magic to the weapon, increasing its sharpness. One blow and he's dead in the grave. He turned his gaze to Cookie and, noticing a gold ring on his hand, thought that the ring of the leader of this gang was clearly somehow problematic. Cookie smiled and apologized to Ray, saying that he would make up for his comrade's mistake. He extended his hand forward and, using the powers of his ring, summoned many golden coins that fell to the ground with a clang in front of Ray. He kept a calm expression on his face, but in his heart he was in shock. Wasting money like that is blasphemy. He just threw away 10,000 yen. Cookie grinned and said that it seemed he had paid him too much. Can he pick up the extra and give it to him? Ray looked at the coins and thought it was an obvious trap. He asked, is this how he pays compensation to victims? Does he force them to kneel down and pick up money from the ground? Ray realized what kind of ring he had on his finger and thought that these coins could explode at the request of the owner of the ring. He decided to play on his greed and ignorance. He threw the dagger, spinning it in the air, and then caught it and said that if they gave him his money, so be it. He would let them out of here unharmed. Cookie, together with Ian, went down to him and asked if he was not on friendly terms at all. Let him not forget that 3 will fight against him. Ray confidently replied that he didn't care how many there were, even if it was 100. His eyes lit up and his smile grew wider in anticipation of victory, and he said that their fighting skills and coins were not worth it. These words hurt Cookie, and he became angry, and then extended his hand with the ring forward and ordered the coins to explode. Immediately after this, everything in the cave was filled with bright flames. Once the explosion died down, Cookie said that he initially thought of just blowing it up, but now he called out to his buddies and told them to chop this idiot into pieces. Adrian replied that he understood and then attacked Ray from behind, but he noticed him in time. He managed to pull back, and Adrian's fist hit the ground with such force that several fragments of stone scattered to the sides. After that, Ray noticed a movement behind him, and Ian, swinging his sword, greeted him. Ray gritted his teeth in displeasure, and when Ian struck, he parried it. But at the same moment Adrian attacked him with fists from behind. Ray did not allow them to hit him and, waving his dagger in a circle, threw the 2 opponents away from him. They fell to the ground, and Ray displeasedly said that he paid them 50,000 to leave him alone for an hour, and in the end they themselves violated the agreement. They are now obliged to not only return his money, but also pay extra interest on top. Cookie again used the ring's abilities and said that they agreed he would pay him interest with his explosive coins. He snapped his fingers and used a coin explosion with a big smile on his face, then threw some coins at Ray as he began to run away, avoiding the small explosions. At that moment, Ian jumped up and attacked him from above. But as soon as he got close, Ray deflected his blow, causing the blade of his sword to break, and he looked at it in shock. Ray didn't give him a second to think and swung his dagger, but he was able to dodge in time. Kuki got nervous and thought, did he break his sword? Is his dagger really an epic weapon? Ray, meanwhile, again attacked his opponents, and Kuki thought that they were much higher in level than him and would definitely not lose. With this thought, he threw several dozen coins towards Ray, and then immediately blew them up. Gritting his teeth, Ray ran away from the explosions and managed not to get under fire, and then turned around and exclaimed, "Who wastes money like that? Are they endless?" Adrian, with a wide smile on his face, attacked him from behind and, clenching his hand into a fist, used the missile punch skill and then attacked, telling him to get it. A roar was heard from his attack and a small shock wave passed through, from which Ian was thrown to the side. Ray's dagger flew out of the cloud of dust and fell nearby, and Adrian was happy and said that it was an excellent blow. He would definitely die from that. Ian exclaimed dissatisfiedly, but did he think about others? He could have been hurt too. He touched the blade of his broken sword and said that what was more important was that it would cost him a lot of money to repair the sword. Kuki picked up the dagger from the ground with a smile and said that no matter what weapon he had, it was worthless in the hands of a weakling. So what kind of dagger did he have? At that moment, Ray used the skill of capturing souls and chains wrapped around the bodies of Adrian and Ian, which suspended them above the ground. Kuki looked up at them in fear, and when the chains began to tighten on the necks of his comrades, they screamed loudly. He became very nervous and worriedly called out to them. Ray said that with the help of the soulsmith skill, he literally squeezed their souls in a vice. This is torture, which is much worse than death. Gritting his teeth in rage, Kuki turned around and saw his silhouette among the cloud of dust. After that, he clutched the dagger tighter and ran towards him. But as soon as he approached, Ray grabbed his hand and pushed him in the chest with the other. He looked him straight in the eye and told him that he was slow. Kuki frowned and asked, "Is it true?" After that, with a crazy smile on his face, he grabbed his jacket with his hands and began shaking it, shaking out a lot of coins from it. He wanted to use the ability and told Ray to try to run away from him now, but he quickly used the capture skill. The chains immediately wrapped around Kuki's body and prevented him from using his ability. After that, the chains spread around his neck and began to tighten more, and he asked why the coin explosion did not happen. Ray replied that soul capture can immobilize the enemy and deactivate skills if the enemy's level is much lower than him. It was like he took away the candy right in front of the child's face. Kuki exclaimed, "Is his level below him?" But he has the 7th level. He is one of the fastest developing players. Ray, using chains, lifted him up to his comrades and said that for a newbie, progress was indeed good. Kuki grunted in pain as he felt the chains tighten even more, and Ray thought that since they were now ready for dialogue, he would see what they could offer him. Using the Eye of the Soul, he saw the names of the 3 guys and what he could take. From Adrian, he can take a fragment of the soul of an F-rank fighter, but to do this, he needs to feed him. From Ian, he can take a fragment of the soul of an F-rank warrior, but in order to do this, he must reunite him with his younger sister. To take an F-rank soul fragment from Kuki, it must cause fear to run through his entire body. He tightened the chains on his body even more and thought, only from him he can get something, right? Kuki gritted his teeth and said that he was in so much pain. Maybe he will let them go. They don't want to die. Ray picked up his dagger and, running his finger along the blade, said that he was talking some nonsense. What good is it to him when they are alive? Kuki got nervous and asked what he meant. Ray said that their eyes, blood, organs, he could just cut them up and sell them in parts. He grinned and said that in this way they would return him 50,000 and cover the interest in an instant. Ian called out to the boss and said that he was clearly bluffing. He will not do this to them. Ray thought that of course he was bluffing. He needs money, but he's not sure that he can contact the sellers with organs. He asked why not. They're not going to give him money, right? Then he will take them himself. Kuki was very scared and cried, asking him not to be angry. He will do whatever he asks, just don't let him kill them. Thus, Rei caused him to fear death, and a fragment of his soul began to be pulled out of his body. The system reported that Kuki was experiencing fear that penetrated him to the bone. All conditions for extracting fragments of the magician's soul have been met. A bottle in the shape of a magician appeared in front of Rei, and the system reported that he had received a fragment of the soul of an F-rank magician. All the chains holding the trio above the ground weakened, and they fell down. Feeling that nothing was squeezing their necks anymore, they immediately started coughing, and Rei threw them a contract with pens and said that here are the documents for them to sign. All three of them read the terms and conditions and began to become indignant, asking what the hell. 90% of the spoils go to him. This is pure extortion. Rei asked threateningly, do they have something against it? They immediately became silent and nervous, and after a short pause they replied that everything was fine. They signed the documents and Rei, checking their signatures, said that they were now his obedient employees. Let them remember, if they dare to evade the terms of the contract, he will come and take his share from their bodies anyway. Are they working for someone? Let them give him his contact information. Having heard about this, they became wary, and Kuki asked in a trembling voice why he needed this. Rei replied that newbies like them couldn't have such weapons. This means they work for someone who gave them such equipment. He's right, isn't he? Kuki fell to his knees in front of him and grabbed his clothes, begging him not to do this. He should not go to him. If the boss finds out that they lost, he will raze them to the ground. Rei put his foot on his head and asked displeasedly, does this mean they are more afraid of the boss than the operation to remove their organs without anesthesia? Ian clenched his hand into a fist. It is unclear what he was more afraid of, Rei's words or the fact that he would contact their boss. So he decided to run away and with tears in his eyes shouted that he wanted to live. Adrian called out to him and Rei, pointing his finger at him, asked, he decided to choose escape, right? The chains immediately tightened around Ian's neck and then suspended him in the air. His friends looked up at him with concern and, stuttering with fear, said that they would do everything. Rei said that he also confiscates money and weapons. They both exclaimed, what the hell? Ian, who was still hanging above the ground, remained silent, and his face slowly began to turn blue. Rei thought that he couldn't even calmly farm the level now without being stabbed in the back, but he didn't even mind. He smiled and said that there is still no one who can compare with him in strength. His status window showed that he was level 36, a novice class. Health 10-17 units, mana 12-35. Also all his stats were in the range from 165 to 194. Night soon fell, and in one of the circus tents, something interesting was happening. Inside there were structures for gymnasts and burning rings. In the center of the stage, a guy named Roku was beating a man, slapping him. From so many blows, blood sprayed from his wounds, and he eventually fell to the floor. The people who were sitting in a cage nearby asked, is there another one? He was unlucky. Roku dusted off his palms and exclaimed dissatisfiedly, they can't even be trusted with simple work. A smile appeared on his blood-stained face, and he asked, is he not at all ashamed in front of his boss? The man in the cage became worried about the wounded man and told Roku to stop. He could die like that. He turned to him and replied that it didn't matter to him whether he died or not. They don't need those who don't benefit the boss. At that moment, their boss named Andre came out from the backstage and asked what they were saying about him. Hearing his voice, Roku turned around and nervously called out to him. Andre smoothed his hair with a smile and asked how the discipline lesson was going. He crouched down next to the wounded man and, examining him, told Roku that he was too carried away. What will happen to the guy if he really broke a couple of bones? Their guild values everyone. Even if they let him down once, they didn't deserve to treat you like that. Realizing that he was being reprimanded, Roku's hands began to shake and he apologized to his boss. The wounded man with a smile and tears in his eyes looked up at the boss and thanked him, saying that he promises next time he will try. But Andre did not let him finish. He took the whip from his belt and waved it, after which he hit him right in the face, causing blood to spurt out from the fresh wounds. He began to hit him on the back and said that such cattle should be treated like cattle. If the bones are broken, he will be completely useless, but a good spanking will not harm any animal. With the next swing he smiled, and the man screamed in pain. At that moment, a trio of guys entered the tent, called out to the boss, and said that they had returned. Andre stopped flogging the man and, looking at them with a gloomy face, said that they were fast. Kuki nervously said that they came to report that as a group of 3 they were unable to complete the task. Andre's gaze fell on Kuki's hand, and he, not noticing the ring, looked at it intently. After a short pause, he asked him where the ring he owed him was. This ring is much more valuable than his pathetic life. He understands that, right? Kuki's words made him flinch, and then he bowed and apologized, excitedly saying that he understood. But it was taken away from him. A man like the monster himself did it. Andre got angry and decided to teach him a lesson by hitting him in the face with a whip. Adrian and Ian were scared, and Kuki fell to the floor after the blow. Andre attacked him and shouted in rage what the hell was going on in their guild. Why do only incompetent asses work for him? Adrian smiled nervously, and Ian looked away, and they both answered him in their thoughts that because all the normal guys had left him. Andre shouted that a moron like him was only good for one job. He called out to Roku, which made him flinch, and then threateningly told him to let Johnny out. As he ordered, Roku released Johnny, a huge white tiger whose every step made a loud sound. Johnny walked up to Kuki and growled, then opened his mouth threateningly wide. Kuki became very nervous and asked in a voice trembling with fear, "He's not serious, right? It's not his fault. He always followed orders correctly." But Andre didn't care about his words, and with a smile he told Johnny that it was time to eat. Hearing the command, Johnny bared his teeth and began to approach Kuki, and he screamed loudly, begging him not to do this. The tiger knocked him down and got down to business. But at that moment Ray jumped onto a metal crossbar, suspended by 2 ropes, and descended towards them. He let go of the crossbar and immediately kicked the tiger, saving Kuki from the beast's grasp. Johnny was thrown aside by his blow and hit the floor. Seeing this, Andre worriedly called out to his pet, after which Ray turned to him and apologized with a smile, saying that this guy had not yet paid the interest, which means he did not deserve to die yet. Kuki was very happy to see Ray, and Andre, not paying attention to him, ran up to Johnny and looked worriedly into his teary eyes and asked if he was okay. "Where does it hurt? Let him show him." The whole trio ran up to Ray and Kuki, grabbing him by the shoulders and saying that he was late. He already thought that he would go to feed the tiger. Ray replied that it is not so easy to get here unnoticed. Let him finally let him go. While they were chatting, Andre became very angry and turned towards them, waving his whip. Raising his hand to the side, Ray delivered blows so fast that they could not be caught by the eye. He cut Andre's whip into several pieces, and then turned to him, waving his dagger. Seeing such power, Andre became nervous and stammered and asked, "Who else is he?" Ray's dagger glowed menacingly, and he replied that he was their new boss. Roku exclaimed indignantly, "Their boss? Have they completely forgotten their place? Have they forgotten how much their boss did for them?" Kuki exclaimed that they don't know anything. Ian agreed with his words and said that they don't even know how creepy Ray is. They couldn't refuse him. Ray frowned and confirmed their words, and then pointed towards the cage and told the people that if they agreed to work for him, he would free them from this circus with this clown. They looked at him in surprise, and the wounded man asked, "Will he really save them from this hell?" Ray grinned and replied that he promised. All they have to do is give him 50% of what they get, and he will also give them advice on how to complete this game. Surely this is much more profitable than staying with a sadistic clone. The three guys behind him exclaimed indignantly, 50%? And he took 90 from them. Ray replied that he wanted to remind him that they tried to kill him. All this made Andre even angrier and said that he hit his little Johnny. Now he plans to take away his workers. His gaze became firm and confident, and he said that he would send their company straight to the underworld. Ray replied that they seemed to live in Japan. Slavery was abolished. Why this attitude? Andre took out a golden card and said that, unfortunately for them, he had this. This card was a guild certificate. Guildmaster, Andrei Lukic Kotonenko. This document confirms the card holder as the head of the guild and also provides him with all necessary procedures in the performance of administrative duties. The certificate was issued by the Director General of the Management Bureau of the Players Association, Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications Kenzo Yamano. Ray read what it said and asked what kind of guild certificate it was. Andre said that the Japanese government, apparently, was deeply imbued with what was happening in Moscow, since it decided to provide the guild masters with a document proving their status and strength, which will help them complete this game. He held the card between his fingers with a smile and said that even the police would not be on their side, because he was the law. He may even kill them if it helps him carry out his administrative duties. Ray said in surprise that it turns out that only innovations appeared in the country. He smiled and said that, in short, if he had this certificate, he could create a real empire of pumping out money. Roku on his knees handed the machine gun to the boss, and he, taking it with a smile, told Ray that he was an idiot. To receive a certificate, he must be a player of rank B or higher. He took aim at him and asked, "But what difference does it make if he dies here?" After that, he opened fire and with a wide smile on his face called them bugs and said goodbye. The bullets flew at lightning speed towards Ray, but he looked at them and didn't even move. He took out a fragment of the magician's soul, after which he activated the soul barrier skill. Stretching his hand forward, he summoned a large barrier in front of him, which protected Ray from bullets. Soul barrier is a skill that is only available after level 25. To activate it, you need a fragment of the soul of an F-rank mage. The material is consumed when the skill is activated and absorbs incoming damage depending on the rank of the fragment. Andre, who continued to shoot, asked, "Did he put up a barrier? Does he think this will stop him?" While he was shooting, Ray said that Moscow even launched nuclear weapons during the ice challenge, but in the end they did not work. Ray started to approach him and asked, "Does he know why? Why don't players attack monsters with guns?" Roku covered his ears with his hands, and Andre continued to shoot and, seeing that he was approaching, told him not to approach. But Ray continued walking, and when the barrier touched Andre, he let go of the machine gun. The barrier kept pushing him back no matter how hard he tried to hold it back, and Roku decided to quickly leave. Andre clenched his teeth and screamed, putting all his strength into stopping the barrier, but nothing worked. Ray took a few more steps forward, and Andre was already starting to be pressed against the wall, and he thought that he would crush him. Ray came close to it, and was pressed so hard into the wall that it began to break. Ray walked away, and Andre's body became covered with sweat, and he began to cough up blood. After that he became exhausted and fell to the floor, and Ray grinned. He said that he needed to remember that skills are the weapons of this age, and his gun cannot compare with them. The wounded man asked in surprise, did he just defeat the boss? The man in the cage said he couldn't believe it. Ray turned to them and, calling them friends, asked if they were thinking of concluding a contract. He even crushed a clown for their fun. Roku ran up to Andre in concern and helped him up, and the people in the cage exclaimed that they hated this freak. Let him let them out and let them get even with him. Then they will agree. Andre said that it is impossible to conclude contracts with a bunch of people without a guild master's license. The police will not stand aside. Roku became concerned about his condition and asked him to calm down, and Ray replied that he seemed to say that they could do whatever they wanted with the cattle, right? Andri remained silent and lowered his head, and Ray released the people from the cage and they approached their offender. Andri and Roku looked up and saw in front of them a bunch of angry people who were ready to shred them. After this, loud screams were heard, and Ray thought that he had gotten himself labor for next to nothing. He can rely on them for a while. While he was thinking about this, he did not pay attention to all the chaos that was happening behind him. All the people attacked Roku and Andri at once, putting all their anger on them, and dust rose from their fight. Ray, meanwhile, opened the task window with the thought that he needed to take care of pressing matters. Looking at the remaining time, he thought, is there a month left? It's time to go somewhere. Time passed, and on a sunny day, Ray went to the site of the certified exam at the headquarters of the Players Association. He walked along a crowded street holding a bottle of his favorite tea in his hands. The guys behind him began to discuss something, and he paid attention to them, listening. The guy said that players who have abilities of rank B and even higher can be recruited by the guild, and they will also sponsor them generously. Let them just imagine an annual salary of 10 million yen. His friend told him not to get too carried away by his dreams. Let him remember that only 1% of all players have rank B. There are only 9 rank players in Japan. His friend happily replied that he would become the 10th. It's still not harmful to dream. After listening to their conversation, Ray began to think. It's already been 2 weeks since the merger of their world and the world of the game Prophecy Online. Initially, many players decided to accept the challenge from the Japanese government to receive 10 million yen. But the result of such an act was disastrous. Everyone died at the hands of monsters. All players are now required to register with the association. Without membership, they will not be allowed into the challenge or into the dungeon. They will also not be able to receive awards. Having replayed the guy's recent conversation in his head, he thought that they had high ambitions. He would like their zeal. While he was walking, someone was watching him from the roof. Ray noticed the pursuer, and immediately after that he threw a road sign at him, which crashed into the pavement with a roar, but did not miss Ray. He was not afraid, but the people around him were very nervous. One of them exclaimed, "What the hell? Did a road sign fall from the sky?" Takuo's loud voice was heard from the rooftop, calling out to Ray and saying that he had finally arrived. Ray looked up at him, and he shouted with a smile that this time he couldn't hide. He jumped off the roof and landed next to a road sign, and Ray asked if he also came to take the exam. He understands that even with the skill of a beginner's blow, it can blow his head off, right? Takuo beckoned him over with his hand and asked if he thought he was the same weakling he was. He received a new class spearman. Ray laughed and repeated, "Spearman? Isn't this a class for morons? Who can't really do anything except wave a stick?" Takuo was offended by these words, and he exclaimed, "What kind of class does he have then?" Ray asked if he really wanted to know. He answered with a confident and proud smile that he was a beginner in the class. Takuo laughed and asked who. Does such a class even exist, or is it deceiving? Ray closed his eyes and replied that he was not lying. His main profession is novice. Takuo held up the road sign and said with a grin that he would believe him. But it will show him what the spear class is capable of. After that, he used a destruction blow and made several lunges with his spear forward. Leaning slightly to the side, Ray easily dodged his blows and began to approach him. Takuo couldn't hit it and nervously exclaimed, "What the hell?" Ray got very close to him and said with a smile that he certainly didn't want to get involved in problems right before the exam, but he provoked it himself. After that, he quickly waved his hand and sent Takuo flying, and he didn't even realize it right away. As soon as he started to fall, he screamed loudly and then hit the ground with a loud sound. Passers-by crowded around him, and some looked at Ray in shock, and he, passing by them, said that it was self-defense and nothing more. After that, he went to the association, and the girl at the front desk said that the exam fee would cost him 8,000 yen. Ray was surprised at the amount and thought it was a robbery. But still he had to pay, and then he sat down and began to wait. sadly lowering his head. An association worker approached him and with a smile apologized for the wait. He looked up at her and she, adjusting her glasses, said that they were starting his exam to obtain a rank. After some time, they came to a huge purple crystal that was floating in the room. Ray thinks, so this is the whole point of the test. He asks if he just needs to put his hand on the stone. He begins to hesitantly reach for this huge crystal, and the energy from the tips of his finger is directed into this huge crystal. Suddenly, the crystal begins to emit very strong energy, which surprised the girl very much, and she asks what is happening. Due to the energy that Ray released, the crystal changed its color to bright blue. She looks at what is happening with great surprise and asks what does this mean. After some time in the office, she slams her hands hard on the table and calls his name very loudly. She says that based on the exam results, they classify his abilities into the A rank category. She is sure that he has already heard about it, but players can also change their classes. The Sword Master, the Great Magician, the Archbishop, if he so desires, they, as an association, will completely help him in this. Ray says he's giving it up. The list of classes she listed didn't seem to be what he wanted. The girl asks what class he wants. He says that she shouldn't fill her head with unnecessary information. She says that even if he wants a certain class, without a special subject he will not be able to change classes, and the association will provide it to him. Ray says that if he needs it, he can get it himself. Is there anything else she can tell him? The girl is a little nervous and asks, isn't he creating even more difficulties for himself now? Ray sighs and says he doesn't know what she's talking about. She says that his strength currently surpasses all A rank holders. People with rank A to D can change class, but E rank people cannot change class. She says that if he refuses to enter into a contract and change classes, under the new law he will receive an E rank. Players with this rank receive many restrictions. For example, they cannot create guilds. By refusing, he will only make things worse for himself. Ray says this isn't the first time the government has come up with strange rules. He thinks that if he really needs this Guildmaster certificate, he can force one of the workers who has at least a B rank to get it. There is only one class that can complete the last prophecy online test, and until this appears, he is not going to change his profession for the sake of a conventional tick. He asks, even if he has an E rank, if he can pass the final test, he will still receive 100 million yen from the government. The girl panics, agrees, and is about to say something, but Ray interrupts her and says that then she can register him as an E rank. She says that she understands him. She will give him a player card with rank E after some time. Ray walked out into the street and is walking along the street where a large number of players have gathered. People around him say that if they have a C rank, then they can join their guild. Would they like to join the Artemis Guild? They invite all players from rank D and above. Ray smiles and says that they are not wasting their time. They will do everything to attract talented players. Two girls come up to him and say that it is immediately clear from him that he is very strong. Would he like to join their guild? Ray looks at them and says he is E rank. They were embarrassed by this and asked, so how? Then they apologize for disturbing you. He continues to walk further and thinks that as soon as he tells him about the E rank, everyone immediately moves away from him as if he were sick. But he doesn't intend to work for anyone, so he doesn't care. He notices a person in the crowd whose aura is different from the others. This guy notices him and starts smiling. A man comes up to him, greets him and asks, he's Endosen, right? He hands him a small card and says that this is his business card. Ray took this card and sees what it says, Wings of Creation Guild, Shinji Sato. The people standing around them point their fingers at him and say that this is exactly the guy. This is the strongest player from the Wings of Creation Guild, Herd-san. Ray asks if they call him Herd. Sato says he is very embarrassed. This is his old nickname, which dates back to the days of the game. Ray looks at him and wonders if he's a local celebrity. Probably we should refuse his offer too. He asks, so what does he need? Takuo says very loudly that this is the Wings of Creation Guild. He walks through a crowd of people and asks if they were really looking for him. Do they want to get a peerless B-rank player like him? He is ready to join them for a decent fee. Ray notices him and thinks that he has met this idiot again. Wait, he got a B rank? He feels as if he was threatening the examiner. Sato apologizes and asks who is he. This is the first time he has heard about it. Takuo asks loudly, so he doesn't know him. He grabs him by the tie and with an angry expression on his face says that he will now show him what he is capable of. Sato very quickly grabs his hand and puts pressure on his shoulder. He pulls his hand very strongly behind his back, which is why he feels very severe pain. He says with a frightening look that he does not want to waste his time on such people while the end of existence is approaching. He must be kind and hide from his sight. Takuo leaves with a dissatisfied expression and says that he must take into account that even if they crawl to him begging for help, he will not help them. Sato says he apologizes for having to witness such an unpleasant scene. Ray says that he shouldn't apologize for this because he always appreciates it when such idiots are put in their place. Some time later, they are sitting in a cafe and he asks, so what did he want? E rank won't be of much use anyway. Sato says he shouldn't get so worked up. After all, he only received this rank because he refused to change his class. Ray smiles and says that the association is turning out to be a lot more social than he thought. They even told the players about it. Sato is confused and says that his guild is directly connected to the association. Before the end of existence, each of them must unite for a common goal, even if this information ends up costing a lot of money. He calls him by name and tells him that if he agrees to join the Wings of Creation, they will pay him the same amount as they paid the association for providing his personal information. Ray was very surprised when he saw the receipt and wondered, does it say 10 million yen? If he were the same as before, he would have agreed without even thinking. He returns the check, apologizes, and says that he is not very interested in joining the guild. Sato says it was kind of rude to offer such talent such a low price. Then how about giving him information? His guild cooperates with many countries. They are considered to have the most extensive database. They will create all the conditions for him and help him find everything he wants. Ray thinks about this and asks, are there anyone among their sources who managed to pass prophecy online? Sato laughs and says that there is no one in the entire world who has completed this game. Ray starts emitting a dark aura and asks how. Then he definitely refuses. Sato was very scared because of how strong an aura he was emitting. He takes the bill they were given and says that if he changes his mind, he can contact him at any time. He will pay for the coffee himself. He leaves this cafe and wonders what happened. Why did he give up so quickly? He approached the worker who was standing behind the cash register and thinking he didn't want to press on him without thereby spoiling the image of the guild. That's not true. That's definitely not the point. All because he was scared. His instincts literally screamed at him that he must run and not anger this beast. Ray quietly approached him and startled him by grabbing him by the shoulder. Sato turns to him with a surprised face and sees him handing him a piece of paper. He smiles and says that if they need his help, they can call him. Depending on the fee, he will agree to a mission from his guild. Sato was very confused by this and agrees and thanks him for it. He stands still and wonders who he even is. Some time later, at the headquarters of the guild, the Wings of Creation, Sato entered the guild master's office. He tells the guild head that he has arrived with a report. The girl turns to him with a smile and says that he did a great job. Did he meet the strongest newcomer? Sato agrees and says that he is a real monster. His hands are shaking due to fear, and he says that this is the first time he has met a player who literally inspires fear. The guild master begins to emit an aura and asks, is it he or she whose power scares him more? Sato is very embarrassed by this and cannot find words. She picks up a document with information about Rei and says that he should get it together. She won't kill him. Everything is so obvious here. Sato calls her Tsukino-san and asks her to forgive him. She says that he shouldn't apologize. He simply told her what he saw with his own eyes. Especially since she is the most inexperienced of the 10 excellent ones, it is not surprising that there are people much stronger than her. This is the guild master of the creation wings, Yamagata Tsukino. 10 excellent ones, these are the strongest players of Prophecy Online. 10 players who can compete for a reward of 100 million yen. In a world where the game has merged with reality, it is they who have gained power. And even their presence affects the balance of power between the countries. Tsukino asks if he returned alone. That means he rejected their offer, right? Sato says he wasn't interested in their information database and the 10 million yen check. Tsukino says that if he is actually number 10, he may not earn that much money. Sato says that, however, if he really is the 10th, then he doesn't understand why he's clinging to the beginner class so much. After all, if he agreed to increase his rank, he would open items that enhance his characteristics. Such things are simply not available to ordinary players. Tsukino smiles and says that she appreciates his guest. However, if what he said is true, then he is not just one of them. He may be the last unknown of the 10 great ones. Sato is very surprised by this and asks if she means number 1. Thanks to American intelligence, it was possible to find the 9 strongest players and rank them according to strength. But they never found the person under number 1, thinking that he did not exist at all. Tsukino says that there were once rumors that the US was deliberately hiding number 1 so that its power would be in their hands alone. Sato says that he thought so too, but when he met him, he was convinced of it, that he could be that number 1. Tsukino gets up from his table and says that since this is so, they have every chance of winning. He must convey a message to the guild members. Any aggressive and malicious actions towards Endo Rei will be strictly punished. It's better not to cross the dragon's path once again. Sato says with a serious face that he listens to her. After a few days, Rei was able to rent an office in an apartment complex. This became his base. Someone who works for him calls his name, and he immediately turns around. This person asks, would it be better to hang the TV like this? Rei agrees and says they can leave it that way. Kuki opens a suitcase filled with money and says that this is today's earnings. Rei took the wad of money and said it was excellent. How does group leveling proceed? Kuki says that everything is going according to his recommendations. Right now teams are continuing to pump in the groundwater, earning 1 million yen per day. Even newbies earn 10,000 yen a day. He didn't even dare to dream about that kind of money. And all this is thanks to him. Rei says that he already told them this. The richer they become, he also becomes richer. For such success, maybe they will earn a bonus. Kuki thinks that even if he gives him 90% of what he earns, the bonus will still be high. Working in a regular guild, he wouldn't have earned that much in a year. Rei thinks his knowledge of this game is amazing. Kuki says that there are still 10 days left until the end of the Earth test, and the prize money has increased from 100 to 400 million yen. Rei says that's true, but he doesn't want to rush too much. They turned on the TV and the news anchor says that this is a breaking report from the scene. Testing of the Earth is in full swing. If nothing is done, then in 10 days Japan will be destroyed. So far the situation has not improved in any way in 47 days. Unexpectedly, the presenter was brought a document and said that they had just received a message from the Japanese government. To all players, the reward for completing the Earth Challenge is currently 1 billion yen. It seems that their government is completely desperate, hoping that there will be someone who can win before the end begins. Rei thinks about it and says that if you continue to delay this, foreign guilds will flock to this award. He grabs his jacket hanging on a coat rack and says it's time to save Japan. He says with a smile that it's time for him to go. Kuki is surprised by this and asks if he will go there alone. Rei turns to him and says that of course it is. He can't expose his money hamsters to danger. This really touched the people in this room, and they call him by name. Ray turns to them and with a frightening aura says that this billion will belong only to him. Kuki is confused by this and asks, so what is the real reason? After some time, at the huge gate, where a large crowd of people had already gathered. Ray goes to this gate and a crowd of people standing nearby. Sato notices him, calls him and says that he came here after all. Ray walks past him and says that he wants to tell him right away. He has no intention of cooperating with him. Sato says he's sorry because he wanted to discuss a money issue with them. If he agrees to carry the luggage, he will receive 100 million. Ray immediately turns to him and says that he must show the luggage. After that they came to a place where there were many backpacks. Sato points to this and says that he wants him to deliver this cargo to his comrades. Ray examines one of the backpacks and asks if he could just get 100 million for delivery. What is it? Sato says it's food. Ray opens his backpack and sees a large amount of food. He takes it out and asks, are these candy bars? Sato says that this is their guildmaster's favorite food. Their camp is located on the 5th level in the deepest part of the Earth Trial Dungeon. But conquest is a long process and his squad is running out of food. Ray smiles and says he senses ulterior motives. Since they are willing to pay 100 million just for the delivery of food supplies, they could find someone else instead of waiting for him. Sato says he wishes he could argue and say that his guild is just being very generous, but he's right. They had already sent 39 groups to the 5th level, but in the end the groups never made it to the end of the route. Ray asks if he said they didn't make it. Is it possible that the test of the land is now different from what it was in the game? Sato looks at him intently and thinks that this man knows something. He says that regarding the differences, their reconnaissance team determined that this dungeon remained the same in design as in the game. But none of the remaining players can reach the depths of the dungeon, and those who were capable of this were already there and awaiting supplies. Perhaps he is currently the only one who can get to the guildmaster. Ray grabs one of the backpacks and says that they don't have enough manpower at all, but since he gets paid, there's no point in complaining. He turns around and asks if he delivers the cargo quickly. Can he expect to be paid extra for speed? Sato smiles and asks if he can clarify this question. Ray looks at him and wonders how much he can get from this guild. Sato, finished talking on the phone, goes to him and says that he was told that if he delivers the cargo within a day, he will be paid an additional 50 million. Ray smiles and says that's great news. He turns towards the gate with a smile and says that he can do it not in a day, but in just an hour. Sometime later at the 3rd level of the Earth test, 2 people stand in front of a huge monster that looks like a praying mantis. It delivers a very strong blow with its claw, but the guy stops this attack. His body is shaking violently due to the tension, and he says that she must leave now. The girl behind him asks, what about him? The guy smiles and says that he is grateful to her for everything. She must leave faster. The girl starts crying and loudly calls a guy named Michael. Ray runs past them very quickly, defeats this monster with his sword, and says that they should get out of the way, because he is in a hurry. Parts of the monster's body fall to the ground, and this scares Michael very much. He stood up and said that he was saved after all. The girl thanks him and says that he saved the life of her dear comrade. They notice that he has already run very far, and this surprised them very much. Ray continues to run through this dungeon and asks if the monsters are over yet. After some time at the 5th level, he runs through a long cave and suddenly stops. He sees on his watch that 42 minutes have passed and says that he even managed it faster. This will be the easiest money in his life. He turns around and something catches his attention. The guy asks, is there a person on the 5th level? Must be the one sent by Sato-san. Ray puts a large backpack on the ground and asks, is he probably from the Wings of Creation Guild? He takes out canned food from his backpack and asks, where is the person in charge of provisions? He brought a load from herd. And they also must not forget to pay him for delivery. The guy says that he is in charge of provisions, but he had already transferred the money to him. Sato-san assured that he would quickly complete the order, so he did not wait. Ray opens the app on his phone and sees that he has been transferred 150 million from the Creation Wings Guild. He says with a smile that they actually transferred the entire amount to him. He is always happy to cooperate with them. The guy turns to the rest of the guild members and says that they were waiting for this. The food has arrived. They start taking food out of their backpack and say that he is their savior. They already thought that they would die of hunger here. He will help them now. Ray looks at them and says that their situation is not very good. The guy who met him stands next to him and agrees with him. He says they lost many in the conquest. Several people are running towards their camp. They loudly say that they need to run away from here because they are advancing. They try to catch their breath after this and say that they won't get them here. The guy is worried about them and asks what happened to them. They hear a very loud scream and cover their ears because of it. They see a large cloud of dust that has risen next to them. A huge number of beetles are flying towards them. Ray realizes that it is a swarm. Suddenly, very strong streams of fire fly next to him. He was very surprised because of this, and Tsukino was already standing behind him with a sword in her hands. With her attack, she destroyed several monsters that were flying towards the members of her guild. Ray turns around and thinks that this is the secret technique of the Elementalist's special class, the Flame of Destruction. He didn't know that there were those who had already mastered this class. Tsukino crushes the beetle's body and says that she is glad to meet him. She is grateful to him for deciding to take on a mission from her guild. She, the guild master of the Wings of Creation, Yamagata Tsukino. She hopes that they will continue to work hand in hand. Ray emits a strong aura and looks at her. He feels a very strong aura emanating from her as she walks towards him. Tsukino looks at him and a strong aura emanates from her eyes. Unexpectedly, when she approached him, she tripped and almost fell. She laughed, apologized, and said that she had not eaten anything for a long time. Because of this, her legs could no longer hold her up at all. Ray looks at her guild members who are quarreling over food and says that he heard that they were running out of food, but that they were already starting to starve. He didn't finish the sentence and they went into the tent. They sit at the same table and he asks, "Is she the strongest among her squad?" Tsukino eats the chocolate and agrees with him. She looks at him and says that although she is the last in strength, she is among the 10 excellent ones. Ray looks at her and asks, "What is this?" "This is a very strange name." Tsukino blushed because of this, slammed her hands on the table, and said that it was not strange at all. This is the name given to the top 10 players who have been among the top best since the days of the game, and the government gave them that name. Ray thinks about this and asks, "Top 10 players? And how did the government know about their powers?" Tsukino says that data on the strongest players was obtained by us intelligence agencies. Only they could not find the player who was first in the rating line. 10 excellent players are sponsored by their government. Were they really not interested in him? Ray wonders if they are government-sponsored. He put a bag of tea on the table and asks how much does the government pay them. Tsukino says it usually depends on the country in which the players live. In Japan, it's about 1,000,000 yen. Ray remembers the million that was transferred to him and thinks about it. He gets angry and thinks that it is because of people like this that he became a gambling addict, and in the end he almost spent his whole life on it. Although, if he is still number 1, maybe he should continue to remain silent about it. If everyone finds out, he will have a lot of problems. He says that even the reward for passing the test of the earth is much greater. Tsukino agrees and says that sponsorship may not be significant, but the biggest money is from those who know at least something about playing this game. After all, no one has yet defeated the local boss like that. Ray asks, even being one of the top 10 players, she is not able to defeat this monster? Tsukino says that no matter how strong she is still an ordinary person. If only she had the level and equipment of her in-game avatar, maybe she could have managed it. But in the current situation, it is unlikely that he will be able to defeat the boss. Ray gets up from the table and says that he understands everything. He has already completed his mission. If they need more help, they can say so. Depending on their fee, they can negotiate. He leaves the chamber with a serious look and thinks that now it is time to defeat the boss living on this level. He won't be able to earn 1 billion without doing anything. Tsukino abruptly gets up from the table and asks him to wait. She says that she would like to defeat the local boss with him. Several guys standing next to her ask what she's saying. After all, they can cope with the boss without him. That's right, it wasn't enough to get involved with this strange guy. Tsukino asks, have they already forgotten her decree? Any aggressive actions towards him will be strictly punished. She understands their dissatisfaction, but she no longer wants to lose anyone. They all remember how they fought against the boss a while ago. Ray strikes the leg of a huge spider with her sword, uses the Hellfire skill, but does not injure this monster. The wounded members of her guild call out to her loudly and tell her that the defenses have been broken and they can no longer fight. Tsukino says loudly that they should listen to her carefully. They should back off. Those who can still move must help the wounded. One of the guys says loudly that if they retreat now, she might get hurt. Tsukino says that she is giving the command to retreat to avoid even more casualties. The guy stopped the monster's attack with his shield and says that she should run away from here, and he will delay it. Tsukino refuses and says that he needs to leave with everyone else. The monster struck again with its paw and immediately killed the guy. She was very surprised by what happened and cannot say anything about it. She clenched her teeth tightly and said that even if it was one person's life, she wanted to save even that. Currently, Tsukino says that she believes that together with him they can avoid big losses. All the members of her guild listen to her carefully and say nothing. She raises her voice and says that clearing the test ground and restoring the balance of power in Japan is all they can do to honor their fallen comrades. The members of her guild felt hope and looked at her with joyful faces. Ray interrupted this moment and said that this was a heart-tugging speech. He was even touched. But she could have stopped talking like that. He turns around and with a sly smile says that he is able to defeat the boss alone. Tsukino looks at him and wonders what kind of conceit is this. But if he's that number 1 out of 10 great ones, are they wrong? How will he fight? In this battle, she will be able to find answers to these questions. She follows him out of the tent and asks if he said she could ask him for help, right? She is ready to hire him in the group to conquer the boss. Ray smiles, turns to her, and thinks he smells money. He asks, but it seems to him that she needs something other than just defeating the boss, right? Tsukino says that she understands that they are asking for something exorbitant, so they are willing to pay compensation for the inconvenience caused to him. Ray smiles and asks, did she say about compensation? This is amazing. 10 million from each member of the group, and he agrees. At the same time, firstly, they pay in advance. Secondly, they should not tell anyone about what they saw in this battle. These are his 2 conditions. They want everyone to survive, right? He needs to defeat the boss and save the lives of her soldiers, and this is where the price comes from. Tsukino says with a smile that she agrees to this. Concerned members of her guild call her name and tell her that she should wait. She raises her voice and says that they should listen to her carefully. They are going to conquer the boss, and they will all help him in victory. They must prepare to leave. Ray looks at them and thinks that 10 million from each member of the squad is quite a lot. How much money does this guild have if it agreed so easily? Some time later, they all walked on together and stopped when they saw something. They see a large number of flying monsters heading towards them. The guild members began to panic about this and asked how many of these monsters are there. Ray takes out his sword and says that he can kill them all if they pay extra. Tsukino eats the chocolate and says that she can handle this on her own. Very strong flames appear around her. She laughs and says that she will not let them interfere with her negotiations. She uses the fire whirlwind skill over a large area and defeats many of these monsters. Rei is surprised by this and thinks she's doing a good job. Her guild members look at this and say that as expected from the leader. Tsukino puts away his sword, from which flames emanate into the scabbard and the fire disappears. She turns around and asks, are they ready to move on? Rei shows his phone and wonders, did this woman eat chocolates 10 minutes ago? He says that he has already received the advance. He turns and says with a smile that they should go take Japan's test. They all move on together, and he says that they will end this dungeon once and for all. Some time later, Rei calmly stands still while the others fight against the monsters. The man asks the guild leader if she is even sure of him. Considering how much she paid him, he expected something more from his fighting skills. He just uses normal attacks and that's it. Tsukino says that this is not entirely true. He must look at the monsters he has defeated. There are no visible injuries on the monsters he attacked, but they are definitely dead. This proves his skillful skills. She watches Rei's actions and thinks that he doesn't even try to dodge, and his blows certainly don't shine with originality. What will he show in the boss's room? Sometime later, before entering the boss room on the 5th level, Rei looks at the door to the boss's room and thinks that he hasn't seen this door for a long time. The guy says that this place makes him shiver. The girl next to him is about to use magic and asks, he is okay? Maybe he needs to be healed? Tsukino steps forward and says that they should move on. She stops, takes out her sword, and says that they must avenge their fallen comrades. Once the door opens, they must use the most powerful blows they have. She, along with the members of her guild, runs forward and speaks loudly that they should go on the attack. They entered the boss room and are heading towards the boss. The system notifies that this is the boss of the 5th level of the Earth test, the Cinnabar Spider. Tsukino, along with his guild members, begins to use the skills Hellfire, Fire Fist, and Phoenix Fury. Because of their attacks, a strong explosion occurs, which caught this monster. They look at this boss with a joyful look and ask, did they really succeed? Rei calmly looks at this and says that this is not so. The monster is still alive. Tsukino looks in surprise at the huge spider in front of her. The monster delivers a very strong blow with its paw and throws several people in different directions. This huge spider, which was hit by several attacks, was not hurt at all, and this greatly surprised the people in this room. Tsukino asks why nothing happened. Aren't insect monsters weak to fire damage? Rei with a calm face says that she is right about that, but their power is low, so they cause almost no damage. The monster shoots a large amount of web at Tsukino, who did not expect it. She and her guild members jump to the sides to avoid this attack. She lands on her feet and says that they must watch out for this monster's web. If they get into this net, it will be difficult to get out. Rei stands next to 2 guild members and sees a web flying towards them. He grabs the 2 and stares at this attack. He jumps up with them and dodges this monster's attack. They land far from the boss fight. The guy who fell to the ground says he's sorry for having to cover them. Rei turns to him and says that he shouldn't apologize. If they die, his reward will decrease. Although they may continue to behave recklessly and expose themselves to attack. For each such case, they will be required to pay another million for each. The guy was very embarrassed by this and says that this is real extortion. Rei looks at the battlefield and thinks that he can continue to drag out the battle, earning another million from their stupidity, but their guild is directly connected with the government. If he continues to behave this way, he may cause problems for himself in the future. He looks at the battlefield and uses the Eye of the Soul skill. He thinks that the condition for obtaining a soul fragment from the guild master is unusual. In the system window, it is written that a fragment of the soul of a rank D swordsman, the condition, will force the bearer to experience the greatest surprise of his entire life. Rei is about to take action and wonders why he shouldn't take a risk. He jumps forward very sharply and flies towards the boss. He channels a large amount of energy into his sword as he flies towards this monster. With one blow of his sword, he was able to cut off one leg of this huge spider. The boss of this location immediately pays attention to him and looks at him with his huge eye. The monster swings its huge paw and is about to attack him. It hits very hard and releases very bright energy. Tsukino covers her face with her hand due to the large amount of dust that flies in her direction and loudly calls his name. She thinks it's all over. Their last hope is dead, and so are they. She doesn't have time to finish her thought because she hears Ray asking how powerful it is that it hopes to kill him. He was able to stop the attack of this huge monster with one hand. The system notifies that he is using the skill Fortitude. The required item to activate the skill is any soul fragment of rank E. People who watch this in surprise ask if he really survived and is blocking the boss's attack with one hand. Ray picked up this huge monster and begins to spin it around himself very quickly. He threw this monster aside, and it leaves a large mark on the ground with its body. Ray very quickly got to this monster, and it looks at him with its big eye on its stomach. He begins to emit a strong aura and says that the weak point of this spider is its belly. Ray strikes very hard with his sword and releases a strong energy that travels through the entire body of this monster. People who watch this begin to rejoice and say that he defeated the boss. Ray turns to them and asks why they decided this. The battle is just beginning. Unexpectedly, immediately after this, a large amount of red smoke begins to escape from the wound on the monster's stomach. The guild members cry out in surprise and ask, "Has the boss changed his appearance?" The huge eye on the spider's stomach closes and a very strong energy appears. The monster suddenly rose to its feet, and people who look at it asked if it had survived. But hadn't he been hit where he was weak? However, this monster has become even larger. A huge spider stands on two legs while Ray calmly stands nearby. He says that the cinnabar spider has two stages. In the second stage, he becomes much stronger and more ferocious. People from the guild were very surprised by this and asked, "Is he joking? Why didn't he tell them about it right away if he knew it?" Ray uses the soul thread skill and says that they wouldn't do anything with this information anyway. He begins to run next to the monster, and this thread stretches behind his hand. He jumps very high above the boss and swings his sword. He tightens this thread that was wrapped around the monster. A huge magic circle appears. The system notifies that the soul incineration skill can be activated. Required level 40 consumables. E rank sorcerer soul fragment. E rank fire user soul fragment. E rank war user soul fragment. Tsukino waves his hand and says that it is dangerous to stay here. They should all go for cover. Ray says the word blaze, and immediately after this, the huge monster is engulfed in very strong fire. The boss begins to scream very loudly due to the very strong pain from his skill. Tsukino looks at what is happening in surprise and thinks that his fire is much stronger than hers. She asks if he really succeeded. Ray stands calmly in place and looks at the monster with a serious expression on his face. The joyful people from the guild happily tell the guild master that the fight is over. Besides, none of them were hurt. They notice something and say out loud that they should look at it. This is a huge block of precious stone. Of course, valuable items drop out of enemies, but they have never seen a stone of this size fall out of a boss. Ray raises his hand to stop them and says they can't go there. The guild members are outraged by this and ask, "Is he kidding me?" He took a whole bunch of money from them, and now he also wants to take the items for himself. The gem starts to move and Ray calls them idiots. He looks at it with a calm face, while everyone else is very surprised. He says that the boss of the Earth test from the obsidian spider turned into a vermilion, and this is his perfect form. Guild members loudly ask, "Is this some kind of mockery? Is it still alive?" They must stop talking because it is attacking. Tsukino, along with his guild members, are very surprised by what they see. The monster uses magic in the area, and a large number of people are lifted into the air. Tsukino jumps up and says that this monster's area attacks have become much faster and more powerful. She manages to dodge the attack with magic, but some members of her guild fall under these blows. She is very worried about this and looks at them. Rei runs up to her and tells her that she shouldn't be distracted. If she wants to survive, she must take her squad away from here. Tsukino runs after him, calling his name and asking what he intends to do. He asks, "Isn't it obvious?" He dodges all the blows of this huge monster and says that he will deal with this boss on his own. Tsukino was very surprised by this and asked what he said. She thinks that in order to evade this series of attacks so easily, she doesn't have time to finish her thought because Rei says that in this phase the boss attacks indiscriminately and will not rest until all players in the room are killed. While they have the opportunity, they need to escape. So, it is one thing to evade these attacks, and another to defeat it. Rei strikes with his sword at the tentacle that the monster uses to attack. This gem tentacle was not damaged at all after his blow. This monster was pleased with what happened and makes joyful sounds. Rei begins to run away from these attacks and thinks that, as he thought, even the hellish dagger is not able to hurt him. He jumps high towards this monster and says that if so, then he will hit the weak spot. He activates the soul reserve skill and strong energy appears around him. The guild members hide behind the protective dome and ask what it even does. Is life really not dear to him at all? Rei smiles evilly and thinks that it should work already. The monster attacks with its tentacles and pierces him in 2 places. He clenched his teeth very hard in pain and screamed. This greatly surprised Tsukino and her guild members. She calls his name loudly and runs to help him. Rei calmly looks at the monster as blood flows from its wounds. He laughs and says that he fell into his trap. Because of this, the monster was very surprised and looked at him. Rei uses his soul/skill and releases many waves of his energy at this monster. His attacks destroyed the body of this monster, and it disintegrates into many large gems. Because of this, Rei begins to fall to the ground with a joyful face. He hit the ground very hard, and this caused a large cloud of dust to rise. He looks at the system window and says that he knew that it would be terribly painful, but if he is not healed, he will definitely die. The system notifies that the soul reserve has 3 seconds left. If he does not restore his health during this time, then the protection of his soul will be removed and he will die. Several healers approached him, pointing their staves at him and using different healing skills. Rei then stands up and says that thanks to their support, he didn't have to use his skills to recover. He examines his already healed wounds and says that her healers are excellent. Tsukino asks, so he planned this from the very beginning. Rei smiles and says that they all play Prophecy online together. The player cannot die so easily from a normal boss attack. This greatly shocked the guild members and they asked, "What's wrong with him?" Tsukino says with concern that this is not true. They are in reality and this is not a game. Rei agrees and says he understands that. Anyway, the same strategy worked in the game, so it would work in reality. And so it turned out. Tsukino looks at him with a very shocked face and wonders what this guy is even thinking about. The system notifies that he has fulfilled the conditions for receiving a fragment of the soul of a rank D swordsman. The condition is to force the bearer to experience the greatest surprise of his entire life. Rei took a fragment of her soul in his hand and thinks that he is lucky. It's not a surprise, but he made her go through a shock. But in any case, he received a rare fragment of the soul. The system notifies that the ground test has been successfully completed. It is necessary to indicate the name of the participants who passed this test. There are 5 minutes left before the dungeon disappears. People begin to rejoice at this and loudly say that they succeeded. They defeated this boss, and it was all thanks to him. Japan is saved, so we can breathe easy. Rei says that so, before the dungeon disappears, it is necessary to decide who to enter into the field of participants. Although he wanted to take the entire reward for himself, why don't they take it and then transfer it to his account? Tsukino turns to him and asks why transfer this to him. Ray says they can only imagine how the news will explode with the news that a test that no one could pass was able to pass an unknown player. Instead, it's easier to say that a famous guild passed the test. They will receive glory and honor, and the rewards for the next trials will also be increased. He thinks that if everyone finds out about his involvement in this, he won't be able to earn so much money so easily anymore. Tsukino asks if he is so worried about money, right? As a guild master, she cannot refuse such a thing, but as a person, she feels that she is taking all the credit for herself. Ray says they are not pocketing anything. They can think so. They hired him to conquer the boss for 1 billion yen. Tsukino agrees and says that then they will announce that it was her Preservation Wings guild that passed the test. She says this, and the system notifies that the record about the participants in the conquest has been successfully saved. Ray looks around and thinks that none of those present will reveal his involvement in passing the test. He took a large crystal and said that this is comparable to accusing one's own guild of stealing glory from a poor newcomer. The system notifies that the destruction of the Japanese test site has been avoided. The test of the Earth has been passed. Some time later, a helicopter flies somewhere over the forest, and the girl says that the earthquake has been going on since the morning. They identified the ground test dungeon as the epicenter. They should look there. The dungeon is destroyed. Very soon players will teleport to the surface. At the same time, people in the dungeon loudly say that they must be careful because everything around them is collapsing. A magic circle appears above them, which sucks in all the people in this place. The system notifies that the ground test has been passed. All players are teleported to the surface. They all fly together towards this magic circle to teleport to the surface. After they all got out, they were immediately delighted by the sunlight and said that it had been so long since they had breathed in fresh air. They all see a huge monument that appeared on the site of the dungeon. Tsukino looks at this happily and says that they were actually able to do this. On this monument, it is written that the test of the Earth was passed by a group of heroes from the Wings of Creation Guild. Many journalists run towards the test participants and loudly ask, "Is the test really passed?" This is a big sensation. Who are these heroes who managed to pass this test? They see Tsukino with her guild members and say that it is definitely them. This group, who took part in the conquest. She sees a large crowd and says that it looks like the journalists don't even know what sleep is. She calls Ray and asks about their agreement. Is he sure about this? She was very surprised when she noticed that he had disappeared and asked where he had gone. The guy finds a note, calls the guildmaster and says that he left this for her. Tsukino took this note and reads this note. It says that if there are problems and the money is at hand, then she can contact him and he will solve any issue. She says that now she has an idea of what kind of person he is. Journalists surround her and say that this is Tsukino-san from the Wings of Creation Guild. The dungeon has disappeared, but did they manage to defeat the boss? Who dealt the final blow? Is Japan safe now? The guy who stops the journalists asks them to calm down. Tsukino calls this guy's name Hiroshi and says that she will handle this. She coughs to clear her throat. She tells the citizens of Japan that she is proud to give them good news. They, members of the Wings of Creation Guild, were able to pass the test of the Earth. All the journalists hold out microphones to her and look at her with joyful faces. It is broadcast on all TV channels, and Tsukino says that she cannot say with certainty that it was only the merit of her guild. Conquering the dungeon became possible only through the joint effort of all players. At the same time, Kuki and Ayan came to Ray by car, and he says that the car has been delivered. He looks at them and says they arrived just in time. Tsukino says she would like to take this opportunity to express her gratitude to all those players who took on the challenge of the land. She, along with her guild members, bow and say that they are grateful to them all. One of the journalists says that this is very modest. So this is what the guildmaster of the Wings of Creation is like. At this time, Ray is driving a car, looks out the window, and says that Tsukino got what she wanted. He thinks that he doesn't care about popularity. The main thing is that in the end, the money will be in his hands. Too much attention would cause him more problems than good. But here, this is an ideal candidate for his face, with which he can cover himself if necessary. Ray says he's hungry, so they'll have to stop somewhere. One of his subjects immediately agreed with him. At the same time, all channels in Japan continue to broadcast an interview with Tsukino and say that this is exclusive news. Now Japan is not in danger of destruction, because the test of the Earth has been passed by the Wings of Creation Guild. This is the second country, after the United States, that managed to pass the test and save the country. At the same time, a large number of people are sitting at one large table and watching this news on TV. After some time in the building of the Gold Farm Players Guild, Ray sits in his office and says that he has received a transfer of 1 billion yen. Two of his subordinates are talking to each other. Wait, did he say billion? He can forget about it, because they will never see this money at all. And yet, what are they even doing? Why are they doing that? He shouldn't ask stupid questions. Since the director said to do it, then that means it's necessary. Ray sits in his chair and looks at the phone screen while one of his workers says that his orders are absolute. He stopped looking at his phone, turns around and asks Rumi how the guild registration is going. She goes to him and says that regarding this, the registration has been successfully completed. But is he sure that she should become the head of the guild? The guild certificate says that the guild master is Rumi Sito. This document confirms the holder of the card as the head of the guild and also provides him with all the necessary procedures for performing administrative duties. Ray says that only players with a B rank or higher can create their own guild. With rank E, such a function is not available to him. Rumi is still worried about this and wants to tell him something about it. She collects her thoughts and says that there are people who are better suited for this role than her. She just doesn't understand it. Ray says he made this choice in her favor because she is the right one for the role. Does he think that thanks to his information, all members of the guild are Gold Farm, were able to raise their ranks to B and even higher? Each of the guild members has both its pros and cons. Her earnings are bad, but her advantages are that she is very diligent and friendly. It seems to him that she is the ideal guild master. Kuki shows his phone and says that everyone is already discussing them on the internet. A lot of news reports that the Gold Farm Guild has appeared. Who are they? An interview was conducted with the guild master of a new and promising guild, which is gaining momentum. Their guest is Rumi Sito. All members of this guild are B rank and even higher. Ray reads the latest news in disbelief and says that the good thing is that he was eventually made head of the chancellery. Kuki asks why he needs a guild. After all, he himself was able to earn a large pile of money without it. Ray says his main goal is to get more orders for information. This world is shaken not only by disasters such as trials that affect the entire country. Some trials are more local, covering only a specific city or village. And orders for passing such tests can only be received by the guild. Kuki is surprised by this and says that he didn't know about it. Rumi says he is getting smarter every day. She hands Ray the tablet and says they've compiled a list of all the easier challenges with decent rewards. He shows the document, refuses, and says that they will deal with this test first. Rumi asks, what's wrong with that? She reads it and says the trials are in a European-style mansion, and the reward is 5 million yen. Given the complexity, it is possible to select orders where they will be paid much more. Kuki asks in a whisper. She agreed to any job. Since when did she care so much about money? Ian says it will be better if he doesn't say this to her. Rumi says that since he himself noticed the test, then besides money, this mansion can store something else. Ray says she understood everything correctly. His eyes light up and he says that they can't miss this. Rumi was very surprised by this and says that she understood him. After some time, someone from the guild is driving along the road in a car. She calls Ray on the phone and says that the task he indicated earlier was intercepted by their guild. They managed to negotiate a reward of 5,040,000 yen. He says they are great. He will arrive on site in 30 minutes. Another phone that lies on the seat next to him begins to ring, and this attracts his attention. Yuji, who called him quietly, says that he arrived at the indicated position. Strange people entered the house. Rei asks how many there are. Yuji says there were 5 of them. He asks, they didn't find him, did they? He says that they did not see him. Rei is about to end the call and says that he will handle the rest himself, and he can leave from there. He thinks the request was intercepted by his guild. So what are others doing there? He clicks on the system window and says, in order not to show his face again, he will use an illusory mask. The system notifies that an illusory mask item is being created. To create an item, he needs materials. Rei says that he received a fragment of a rank D swordsman from Tsukino. The system notifies that automatic creation. Because of the D rank swordsman's soul fragment, the chance of creating this item is 0.23%. Does he want to create this item? Rei asks, what if you create this item manually? The system notifies that if created manually, the probability of success is unknown. If he fails while creating an item, he will suffer physical or psychological consequences for it. Does he want to create an object? Rei agrees to this, and the system notifies that a transition to the soul's forge is being made. He needs to harmonize the soul with the subject. The likelihood of success depends on how he copes with this task. He is transported into the space of the forge and sees many figures floating in the air. The system notifies that since the base success rate is below 1%, the difficulty will be increased. The time limit is 1 minute. Rei begins to very quickly rearrange these figures in the correct sequence and manages to finish at the very last moment, when there is almost no time left. The system notifies that his soul is in complete harmony. The success rate is 100%. Makes the transition to the material world. Rei has returned to consciousness, and the mask he just created is floating above his hand. The system notifies that the illusory mask was made thanks to the skill of the Soulsmith subclass. He put this mask in his inventory and says that he must stop him here. Ian turns to him and agrees to this. Rei got out of the car, walks in the right direction, and is about to say something, but pauses. He took out a mask, which he immediately put on his face. His appearance has changed, and he thinks that with this mask people will see him as a different person. He walks towards a very tall mansion for which they received a contract. He goes inside and doesn't hear any sounds. Rei notices the armor and thinks there are a whole bunch of corpses here. They were set on fire, and the smell of burning still hangs in the air. He goes down the stairs and thinks that it looks like they are already waiting for him below. He sees that in the bookcases there is a teleport to another dimension. Rei approached this passage and thinks that the hidden door has been opened. They seem to be looking for a hidden test. Depending on the complexity, tests are divided into large-scale and small-scale. Large-scale tests are those where the entire state is involved. Small-scale, affecting small settlements such as cities or villages. Well, it's logical to assume that small-scale tests are not that complicated. Therefore, you won't be able to make a lot of money from it. But even among these tests, there are exceptions. These are hidden tests. They occur only in small-scale tests, in secluded corners. The level of difficulty is significantly higher than that of a small-scale test and has nothing in common with the main test. The best thing about these challenges is that you can get rare items. Rei begins to walk down the long stairs and thinks that, in other words, such challenges can only be found by those who have information about the game. He went down to the very bottom and sees several people in robes standing next to each other. One of them takes off his hood and asks if he is a representative from the Gold Farm Guild. They were waiting for him. Rei was confused by what he heard and had an idea. He asks what kind of gold farm is this. The guy was embarrassed by this and asked, so it turns out he made a mistake. But that's not that important. He sees that he is capable of passing this hidden test. Rei apologizes with a serious face and says that he does not intend to go through this for them. The guy says that he misunderstood him. There is no need for this, because it has already been passed. He takes out the item with a smile and asks, "He came for this with a box, didn't he? Or is he wrong?" Ray quietly takes a weapon from his inventory in his hand, which he hides behind his back and wonders, "Have they already gone through this?" He asks, "What if this is so?" Unexpectedly for him, the guy throws him this box with a sharp movement of his hand. Ray catches this, but continues to watch them closely. The guy with the kind face says that he is giving it to him as a sign of gratitude, but in return he wants to ask that he fulfill their request. Ray asks what kind of request is this. The guy says that he must prevent other people from taking the small-scale test. It doesn't matter how he does it. If he is an experienced player, then he knows how to hinder others, right? Ray wonders why they want to prevent the test from taking place. He closes his eyes and says that he understands who they are. They are from a dark guild and want to do the same thing that happened to Argentina, right? He thinks it happened about 2 weeks ago. One of the cities of Argentina, namely Mendoza, was completely destroyed because no one could pass a simple test. But the whole problem happened a week ago. Shares of companies that were based in this city were massively short-sold across the board. As if someone knew in advance that in a week this city would be wiped off the face of the earth. Ray smiles and says that he heard that the Dark Guild was to blame. They've played enough with Argentina, and now they're taking on Japan. The guy with a sly smile says that he can't, of course, continue to fantasize about the reasons for their offer to him, but it will be better if he answers. Does he agree or not? Ray calmly says that he refuses this offer. No matter how tempting their offer may sound, if you choose which of them will destroy the city, then it would be much more profitable for him to do it on his own than to serve someone. The guy says he's very sorry. Then he asks him to return this box. Besides, he will have to pay a small percentage for the time he held this box in his hands. Ray asks, "What is this percentage?" The guy says that this is a percentage in the form of his life. He takes out a syringe from his inventory and says that after their meeting he has only 2 choices, either cooperate obediently or die. Ray pulled out his sword from behind his back and asked if they really thought they could defeat him. The guy says that in a normal situation it would not have worked out for him. His eyes light up and he says that they managed to pass this secret test. He injects the contents of the syringe into his throat and says that he will be able to feel this power on himself. The rest of the people also inject themselves with it, and he says that the player's skills are useless in front of the power of the Darkest Guild. After that, they all dropped their syringes on the ground together. They begin to suffer from pain, scream loudly, and emit a dark aura. The main guy's face has changed. He laughs and raises his head. He sees the real appearance of Ray, who is hiding behind the mask. He looks at them and asks, "Is this doping?" He thinks about it. It affects physical performance, right? But outwardly they remain the same as they were. Why are they standing still? He looks at the box in his hand and thinks that he understands everything. In this case, he will play along with them. Unknown people felt better. One of them put his hand in his pocket and pressed something. Because he pressed the detonator button, the box in Ray's hands exploded. They all start laughing loudly together because of what happened. The main guy says that he fell for such a simple trick. What idiots all these players are. They all believe that the game's mechanics have made them invincible, but they still remain too naive. All he needed was to divert his attention to a possible threat from them and detonate the box. He's sorry, of course, but they don't need useless tools. When he came closer, he was surprised by something and did not understand what had happened. He notices that only a box stands at the site of the explosion and asks where his body went. Suddenly, the guys who stood behind him were attacked from behind while they were confused. The guy turns around sharply, releases flames from his palm, and says loudly that he understands everything. Ray covers himself with his hands while his comrades scream loudly in pain and ask Ridge-san why he did this to them. He pays no attention to this and continues to blow out flames and says that he will burn him alive. Unexpectedly for him, Ray's body disappears right in front of him, and he asks if this is really an illusion. He puts the blade of a sword to his head and says that of course he feels sorry for his friends, but now it's over. Ridge slowly turns to him and looks at the sword with a scared look. Ray uses the soul-capturing skill and lifts him off the ground using the chains created by his ability. Ridge is shaking with fear, looks at him and says that this can't be true. Why did he survive the explosion? Ray turns around and says with a smile that he was well aware of the value of this box. Does he really think that he would believe that he gave it away simply out of kindness? He picks up the box and says that from the very beginning it was clear that it was mine. Ridge asks if he knew, then why did he take it into his hands? Ray smiles and says that he really underestimates high-level players. For them, the explosion from such a small bomb is like the wind blowing in their face. He calls Rumi and says that although he will take the money from his wallet for the damaged clothes. Ridge begins to panic and asks if he is going to contact the police. Ray says that's not true. He's making a call about a much more important matter. Rumi answers his call and asks if he has already completed this test. Ray says she should look at Japan, where stock buying is more avid. Perhaps the Dark Guild is doing the same thing to their country as it did to Argentina. They must not allow this tragedy to happen again. Rumi is going to do what he asks and says that she listens to him. Ridge says with a smile that he is truly a hero of justice. Ray asks with a sly smile what kind of justice is he even talking about. After all, they deliberately collapse sales of shares of a couple of local companies, selling them for cheap. If his people buy it and he passes the test, I wonder how much money he'll get out of thin air. Ridge is embarrassed by this and asks if he really decided to go to war against the Dark Guild. Ray says with a smile that if there is a lot of money at stake, he will do it with great pleasure. Or they can cooperate with them. Ridge chuckled and loudly asked who in their right mind would cooperate with them. Ray holds the phone over his shoulder while he looks at the contents of the box and asks Rumi if he's ready for re-education. She asks, is he talking about the very thing where a character with restoration is needed? In fact, everything is already ready. But they have not yet conducted experiments and do not know how effective such methods will be or at least humane. Ray with a sly smile says that he will deliver the lab rats to her soon, so she should prepare. The system notifies that, thanks to the evolution box item, a fragment of the soul of a rank F magician turned into a fragment of the soul of a rank E magician. After some time in the Museum of Modern Art, Ray stands at the entrance to the building, calls on the phone and asks, is this the target of the Dark Guild? Is she sure about this? Rumi stands in the room where her guild members are bullying the Dark Guild members and speaks that everything is exactly like that. Rayson and his employees confess to everything. But unfortunately, they don't know how many enemies there will be in the area. Maybe he shouldn't have gone alone. Ray calmly walks inside and says that this is his concern, and she should continue to monitor the stock. On the internet, a user with the nickname Takisa Justice writes that he is looking for a group to conquer. No reward is implied, but they must protect the city. He is looking forward to everyone at the Museum of Modern Art. He stands among the crowd of people and says that everyone who is going to take the museum test, their time has come. If they are interested in participating in the test, then he asks them to come here. He is a leader in protecting humanity. Ray stands in the crowd of these people and says that quite a lot of people have gathered here. He smiles and says that there are more than 100 of them here. Takisa says it's hard for him to convey his feelings of admiration and pride at how many people showed up today to protect their city. He is grateful to each of them. Ray looks around and thinks that he can't believe that so many people would come to the test without a reward. But on the other hand, a spy could easily hide in this crowd. He channels energy into his eye and wonders if he should find it before everyone goes inside. Takisa says they should start the test. They may not be afraid to call for help if they encounter a strong enemy. Association workers will definitely help them. Ray smiles and thinks that they don't have any strategy or anything like that. It's stupid, but he benefits from such freedom. He goes inside and says that he has a guess as to who exactly the spy will be. But what is the best way to deal with them in the end? Out of 107 players who took part in the test, all 106 participants turned out to be spies from the Dark Guild, and he alone is the exception. Takisa points in the direction of the test's entrance and says that they should all be careful. They all found themselves in a test together, which took the form of a large hall with paintings and sculptures. Ray looks around the place with a smile and says that it all looks very expensive. He looks around and sees several people with spray cans standing around him. They are shaking these cans and are going to spray in his direction. They release a gas that immediately ignites, but it doesn't hurt him at all. Ray jumped high, takes his sword out of his inventory, and looks at the people who attacked him. He runs very quickly next to these people and defeats everyone with his quick blows. He smiles and asks, are they blindly rushing into battle and are not interested in the fact that their opponent is superior to them? What obedient and fearless dogs they are. Takisa runs into this hall and loudly asks what is happening here. He was very surprised by what he saw here. Ray says they suddenly attacked him, and he had to calm them down. Takisa runs towards him and says that this is terrible. He stabs him unexpectedly and says he hopes he's not hurt. Ray calmly stopped his knife, grasping it with only 2 fingers. Takisa tries to snatch the knife from his hands using all his strength, but realizes that he cannot move his hand. He wonders what kind of power he has. He lets go of the knife and very quickly jumps away from it several meters. Ray broke his knife with 2 fingers and says that this is a weapon that is not even a game item. With this, he will not be able to harm any player. Maybe stop making this farce. He knows that they are all connected with the Dark Guild. Takisa says with a sly smile that since he knows everything, it's even easier. Several people rise up and ask him what kind of Dark Guild is this? Didn't this test come from an environmental group? Takisa smiles and says that's right. The Environmental Protection Group is precisely a business partner of the Dark Guild. Maybe they can just calmly discuss everything. What he thinks? Their priority goal is not to kill him, but to protect this place. He wouldn't want to become enemies with him. He understands that, right? He says with an angry face that if he agrees to cooperate, he will arrange to be paid an allowance of 100,000 yen. People ask with a dissatisfied look, will they pay him 100,000 while they only have 30,000? That is, the Dark Guild promised them a fee of 30,000 yen. Ray looks at them and thinks that he understands everything. In the past, he would also have agreed to such a scam. He waves his hand incredibly quickly and says with a smile that he has to give it up. Takisa stretches his neck and asks, is that how he decided? He's very sorry. He became serious and says that if this is the case, then he will have to kill him. He gets down on his knees, starts emitting strong and bright energy, and tells his dear friends that he has a special offer. Only now, whoever kills this guy will receive 100,000 yen from above. He points the crowd of players at him and says that they must kill him. They all attack him at the same time and are going to attack him with everything they could find in the area. Ray begins to move very quickly and smoothly with a small smile. He runs through this crowd of people with incredible speed and knocks them out with blows of his palms. He stops and looks at Takisa, who runs towards him and speaks loudly, that he should not underestimate the head of the judo club. Ray jumps up and unexpectedly lands a very strong knee to the face. Immediately afterwards, he jumps over him and uses the soul capture skill to capture him with magical chains. He landed and delivered a palm strike to the neck to knock him out. After that, Ray dusts off his hands and asks, is this really all? 2 frightened people sit against the wall and say that they are giving up and asking not to kill them. He looks at them and thinks that it seems they still know something about the Dark Guild. It would be stupid not to take advantage of it. Ray called someone on the phone and says that he won't kill them if they cooperate. He calls Rumi and says that he has great news. They will have a whole 100 new guild members. She was surprised by this and asked if they would also have to undergo a re-education course. She is afraid that few out of 100 will be able to withstand it. Ray says that's not true, because these are not ordinary newbies. They will not re-educate them. But one head of the Association for the Defense of Humanity definitely needs their courses. Suddenly a sword flies towards him very quickly, from which strong dark energy emanates. The sword releases this large amount of energy after colliding with the floor, and this throws away the bodies of people who were unconscious. Ray managed to dodge this attack and looks at the one who did it with a serious look. He lands and sees a man standing on the balcony above. He smiles and says that he finally came out. The guy in the mask asks how long ago he noticed him. Ray smiles and says that he noticed him from the very beginning. As soon as he arrived, all the players who came were ordinary extras, weren't they? He remembers what happened before entering the test and says that among all these weaklings, he stood out very much. No matter how hard he tried to hide his powers, everyone else simply paled in comparison. The guy took out 2 swords that were created from his energy and says that he discovered it so easily. It's not surprising how quickly he understood everything. He flies towards him very quickly and asks if he can survive the fight against him. He strikes with 2 swords at once, but Ray blocks this blow with his dagger. They exchange many very fast blows and each reflects the attacks of his opponent. The guy in the mask creates a very bright flash of dark energy and they jump away from each other. He runs to him very quickly and says that parrying his blows with just a dagger is amazing. He became much stronger than he was in the game, didn't he? Ray runs very quickly towards him and asks if he seriously thinks so. He makes a sharp blow with his dagger and cuts the mask into 2 perfectly even pieces. His mask fell to the ground, and Ray took a fighting stance and said that it was still him. He would never have thought that he would meet an acquaintance with whom he spent time in the game before the disaster. He calls him Yudo, and this really surprised him. He reactivates his second sword, calls his name and says that he is glad to meet him. And at the same time, he regrets that their meeting took place precisely under such circumstances. He gets into a fighting stance and says with a serious look, he is obliged to end his life.